Eddard Stark had never known the weight of his own heartbeat until that night. He was no stranger to agony or to guilt, but the relentless pounding in his chest left him breathless as he clung to the shadows of the hallway in the royal apartments. The stone walls of the Red Keep were cold beneath his fingertips, and every torch cast the shapes of flames dancing upon the ancient surfaces, throwing his own flickering silhouette before him like a specter of regret. This was a thing he had never thought himself capable of doing, a betrayal that would stain his honor forever, yet here he stood, sword in hand, resolved to see it through. Outside, King's Landing sprawled in darkness. The stench of smoke and blood still clung to the air from the battles and riots that had raged through its streets in the name of rebellion. Robert Baratheon's victory, the toppling of House Targaryen, had seemed a certainty only hours ago. The city had fallen, the bells of surrender tolling their somber dirge. And the very man who had led that triumphant conquest, who had rallied the Stormlands and the North in righteous fury, now slumbered on the other side of the door. Yet if Robert awakened and found what Eddard meant to do, only one of them would leave this room with breath still in his lungs. It was a single door that separated Ned from his friend. The thickwood was reinforced with iron. Silent steps, measured breathing. Ned held the pommel of his sword and prayed to the old gods for resolve. He thought of Catelyn waiting for him in the safety of Riverrun, thought of the children they might have one day. He could see the hearth in Winterfell, the beams overhead that would creak at night under the weight of snow. He remembered the mercy that had always guided his life, the sense of justice and fairness that had been as integral to his soul as the dire wolf to the Stark sigil. Then he remembered the small face of the girl in the other room, her silver-gold hair tangled with fear and sorrow. He pictured the boy who had been clinging to her hand. Targaryens, yes, but children. Children who had never done him or Robert or anyone any wrong. He inhaled, drawing strength he did not feel. The corridor was empty. He had arranged for that, sending away the guards who might normally stand outside the king's door, forging some excuse about the threat of Targaryen loyalists prowling the keep, urging them to lock the gates and defend the walls. They had gone because it was Eddard Stark who commanded them. How would they react when dawn broke and they learned of his treachery? There would be rumors, inevitably. Whispers in corners that the quiet lord of Winterfell had turned traitor or that madness had claimed him. But Ned knew madness had nothing to do with it. This was love and pity and a fierce need to shield innocence from a horror he could not stomach. He gently lifted the latch. The door opened with a groan that felt loud enough to wake the entire Red Keep. He froze, heart hammering. But Robert did not stir. The room was dimly lit by a single brazier that must have been tended hours ago. Bronze fittings glinted in the low light. Robert lay sprawled on the bed, mouth slightly open, half out of his clothes, as if the simple act of undressing had defeated him. War had exhausted them all, but Robert had drunk so heavily at the feast of victory that he likely heard nothing now, not even the echo of the bells that had tolled for Aerys Targaryen's downfall. For a moment, Ned hesitated. He remembered the Robert of their youth, the boisterous friend who had given him his first taste of strong wine, the comrade he had fought beside at the Trident, the man who had saved him from a spiked mace in a skirmish. Robert had always been loud and brash, but beneath his thunderous laughter was a heart that believed in triumph and justice, at least once upon a time. But cruelty too often found purchase in the hearts of men who warred for too long, who had suffered betrayals and heartbreak. Ned recalled the fury in Robert's eyes when he learned that Rhaegar Targaryen had stolen Lyanna Stark. He remembered how that fury had turned to a feral thirst for vengeance. The horror of seeing Targaryen blood spilled in the throne room or on the steps of the Great September, of seeing Elia Martell's body. He told himself that Robert was not the same man he had once been, that mercy for Targaryen children was not in Robert Baratheon's heart. If Ned did not act, if he did not commit this unspeakable crime, those two children, innocent of any wrongdoing, would be slain. The mountain had already slain Rhaenys and Aegon as far as Ned had heard, though rumors were uncertain. Perhaps only one child had truly been lost, or maybe both, but the blood was real. The little silver-haired babe that Ned had just found trembling in a forgotten corner of Maegor's holdfast, she would be next. Robert wanted no Targaryen left alive. That was how House Baratheon, the new royal house, sealed its claim. Ned approached the bed, each step measured and silent. He could hardly breathe, as though the air in the room weighed heavier than a winter storm. Robert's armor lay discarded on a nearby chair. The warhammer that had smashed Rhaegar Targaryen's chest plate on the trident was propped against the wall like a sleeping beast. The smell of ale and sweat emanated from the king's parted lips. He let out a soft snore. Ned forced himself forward. With a single twist of his wrist, he muffled the faint creak of his scabbard. The edge of his blade, ice, caught the brazier's light. How many times had Ned wielded that sword in honest battles or administered the king's justice with a conscience clear that he was fulfilling his duty? Tonight, there was no honor in what he would do. This was not the king's justice, this was murder, regicide. But if Robert lived, then those children would surely die. And Ned Stark could not abide by such slaughter. He raised the blade with both hands. Even in the darkness, he could see how Robert's broad chest rose and fell with each breath. Ned prayed silently not only to the old gods, but to the memory of his father, to the memory of Lyanna. He prayed for forgiveness for breaking the vow he had once made to Robert, that they would always stand side by side as brothers. He prayed that somehow, someday Robert might understand that it was the kindness in Ned's heart that forced him to do this. But he knew it was a fool's prayer. Time seemed to slow as though the gods themselves paused to witness. Ned could hear the drumming of his own blood behind his ears. His eyes burned with tears. He felt the cold of the steel in his grip and an ache in his soul so profound it nearly made him drop the sword. Yet the thought of those innocent children gave him strength. He would not let them be murdered, not even for the sake of Robert's great rebellion. His voice came out in a rasp. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he brought ice down in a swift, terrible arc. A strangled gasp emerged from Robert's lips before the sword found its mark. The blow was true, severing his life as cleanly as an execution. Blood poured onto the sheets. Robert's eyes snapped open, momentarily lucid with shock. Ned forced himself to watch, to witness what he had done, while tears blurred his vision. He heard the dying gurgle in Robert's throat. For an eternal moment, Robert's eyes locked onto Ned's. Recognition flickered, followed by betrayal, heartbreak, and finally, the emptiness of death. Ned Stark stood there, trembling, struggling to breathe past a grief so immense it felt like a mountain on his chest. The taste of bile rose in his throat, but he swallowed it back. He had done this. He had taken a friend's life. And the cost to his soul, he suspected, would be unending. Blood was on his hands, and not for the last time that night. He sank to his knees by the bedside and let out a quiet moan that nobody heard. At length, he found the presence of mind to pull himself together. He needed to leave, to vanish with the children before the alarm was raised, before the guards realized what had transpired. If he was caught here, steel in hand, the Targaryen babes would be as good as dead and likely Ned's own family as well. The world tilted around him as he rose unsteadily, wiping the blade of ice on a spare cloth. He cast one final glance at Robert's lifeless body. The face was slack, the eyes open, the large frame so still. Once that visage had been handsome and full of boyish laughter. Once it had been the face of the man Ned would have followed to the ends of the earth. Now it was only a hollow shell. A tear rolled down Ned's cheek. He left the king's chambers the same way he had come, each step a burden. The corridors of the Red Keep felt too narrow, too suffocating. And yet, through that choking gloom, he pressed on. Time was the enemy now. Time and the memories that clawed at the back of his mind like ghosts. He pictured his dire wolf sigil gray on a white field. Were the old gods turning their faces from him now in horror? Or did they understand this impossible choice? He found the children where he had left them, hidden in an old storeroom off a side corridor. Ser Barristan and Selmy had placed them there, or so the rumor went. There had been a flurry of confusion in the keep. Someone had tried to protect the babes from the sacking. By the time Ned had arrived, the girl was sitting by a barrel, hugging her knees, her bright eyes wide with terror. The boy, no more than a toddler, had clung to her side, silent with shock. Ned closed the door behind him, sheathing ice with trembling hands. The older child, the girl, rose to her feet. She seemed older than her years in that moment, already aware that something monstrous lurked outside these walls. Her hair, nearly white blonde, fell around her shoulders. She peered up at him. Ned remembered how she had asked him, "Sir, are you here to help us or harm us?" Her accent had the refined lilt of the Crownlands aristocracy, a bit of the Valyrian inflection that the Targaryens carried in their blood. He had crouched to look her in the eye and told her, "I'm here to keep you safe, my lady." Now he did not speak for a moment. Blood still stained his hands, though he had tried to wipe them. The girl's gaze seemed to fix on the dark splotches. Ned felt shame burn in his chest. He forced himself to push aside that roiling guilt. There was no turning back now. "We must leave," he said quietly, "this moment if we're to get you to safety." She looked at him as though trying to discern if he was truly an ally, but she seemed to sense the sincerity in him. She nodded, and with a gesture that was heartbreakingly gentle, she reached for her younger brother's hand. "We're ready." Ned took a cloak he had pilfered from a guard room and draped it around them both. "Stay close to me," he said, "and keep quiet." In the flickering lantern light, he caught a glimpse of the Targaryen sigil on the boy's miniature tunic. Someone had embroidered a three-headed dragon, the symbol of a dynasty that had ruled for nearly 3 centuries. Now that dynasty had been shattered, its remnants scattered to the winds, and House Baratheon was ascendant. But for how long, Ned wondered, given that he had just ended Robert's life? If the realm discovered what he had done, chaos would ensue. The Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Arryns, everyone would scramble to fill the void. War upon war. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, he had to secure these children. He slipped out of the storeroom, the children at his heels, and guided them through the labyrinthine corridors. He had spent enough time in King's Landing during the final days of the rebellion to know the ways that were less guarded. But they still had to be careful. Every corner could hide a sentry. Every archway could reveal a watchful pair of eyes. The Red Keep's labyrinth of stone and secrets had been a fortress for Targaryen kings for generations. Now Ned used its familiarity to spirit away the last vestiges of that royal line. More than once he paused, holding up a hand for silence while muffled footsteps passed or drunken soldiers slurred their triumph in distant halls. It was near dawn and the city was half asleep after the fierce battle. But that sleep would soon break. Once Robert's body was found, every guard in the keep would rouse like a hornet's nest. There was precious little time. Finally, Ned led the children down the winding steps that opened onto a small courtyard near the stables. The air here smelled of horses and damp straw with a hint of ashes still drifting from distant fires. It was a deserted corner of the castle. Most of the stables were nearly empty, the horses requisitioned by victorious rebel soldiers. Ned had left his own mount here, as well as a chestnut mare he'd readied earlier. Across the courtyard, the stable boy was asleep against a bale of hay. Ned moved swiftly, lifting the children into the saddle, the little boy first. The girl mounted behind him, her slim arms wrapped protectively around his waist. Ned took a second to steady his trembling hands on the mare's reins. He heard his own breathing echo in the hush. The sky overhead had begun to lighten, but the stars still clung to the horizon, faintly flickering. "Hold on to me," he told them. He lifted himself onto the horse's back, settling behind the girl. Together, they rode out through the unguarded postern gate, which Ned had personally ensured would be left unbarred, telling the watch that men were still returning from the city's sacking. They slipped into the half-lit streets of King's Landing, where broken cobblestones bore witness to the ravages of war. Bodies lay in the gutters, signs of looting scattered about in the form of splintered doorways and smashed windows. The stench of death clung to the city. It made Ned's stomach roil as he thought of how different the capital might have been had cooler heads prevailed. Aerys Targaryen's madness had led to this, but Robert's brutality had fanned the flames. And now Ned's own desperate act had added a new dimension to the tragedy. They wove through the silent streets, avoiding main thoroughfares. Ned could hear the distant moans of the wounded, the occasional crackle of dying fires. Once, a group of Baratheon men wearing the crowned stag sigil on their dirted cloaks passed at the far end of a lane. Ned tensed, but they were too drunk or exhausted to pay attention, and their lantern bobbed away into darkness. At last, they reached one of the lesser-used city gates, where a single guard stood half asleep. Ned had chosen this route carefully. With the chaos in the city, guard rotations had gone awry. The man barely glanced at them, only half registering the presence of a cloaked knight or lord with 2 small passengers. Ned had taken off his own surcoat, hoping to avoid the Stark sigil betraying him. He knew if the guard recognized him, there might be trouble. But fortune, or the old gods, had not forsaken him. They were allowed through without question. Outside the city walls, the rolling farmland and scattered huts were still touched by the pre-dawn chill. Mist clung to the fields, and every so often Ned saw a burnt homestead or a fallen fence, reminders of the war's toll. He pressed onward, urging the mare into a steady canter, hoping to put as much distance between themselves and King's Landing as possible before the sun rose high enough to reveal them plainly on the roads. For the moment, the children were silent. Perhaps they were stunned by all that had happened, or perhaps they simply had no more tears left to shed. Ned's mind churned with fears. How would he keep them safe once the news spread that the usurper, no, the king, Robert, was dead? Would Stannis or Renly Baratheon march on the city in outrage? Would they blame Targaryen loyalists, or suspect Ned? How could he hide 2 Targaryens, the last heirs of a hated dynasty, from the entire realm? But no matter the questions, he could not undo what he had done. He had killed Robert Baratheon so that innocent blood would not be spilled. He would bear that burden. He would do what he must to protect these children, even if it meant living in exile or turning his back on Winterfell. The vow he had made to protect the weak and innocent superseded all. For a Stark, honor was paramount. It was a twisted irony that, to uphold that honor, he had committed one of the foulest deeds imaginable. They rode on until the first glow of sunrise touched the eastern sky. Ned felt the ache in his arms and legs, the numbness creeping through him. But he refused to stop until the red keep was a mere silhouette behind them. Only then, beneath the branches of a twisted oak near a small stream, did he finally halt. His legs wobbled as he dismounted, and he carefully lifted the boy and girl down. The boy whimpered softly, his wide eyes searching Ned's face as though he expected some explanation for the horrors he had witnessed. The girl tried to keep her composure, but Ned could see the sheen of tears in her violet eyes. The Targaryens often had that lilac hue. "I know you're tired," Ned said, his voice soft. "We'll rest here for a short while, and then we must continue." The girl spoke, her voice trembling. "Where are you taking us?" Ned paused, considering how much to reveal. "Somewhere far from here," he answered gently. "Somewhere no one will think to look for you." In truth, he was still formulating a plan. Dorne might be an option, but Tywin Lannister had men scouring the region. The free cities might be safer, yet the journey across the narrow sea was fraught with risk. There was also the Vale or even the North. But how could he hide their identities? The boy's hair was almost pure silver, the hallmark of Valyrian lineage. The girl's was a shade darker, but still easily recognizable as Targaryen. He knelt by the stream to let the mare drink. The children hovered close, as if they trusted no one in the world but him. It cut Ned to the core. They had so few people left to trust. He reminded himself that he had done the right thing, or at least the only thing he could live with. That had to matter. In the distance, the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in pale pink and gold. A new day. A day in which the realm would wake to find its new king murdered in his bed, and the last Targaryens vanished. Chaos would unfold. Lord Eddard Stark would become a fugitive. The rebellion's cause, once so clear-cut, so righteous, would dissolve into accusations and hunts for traitors. And far away, in a quiet glade near a trickling stream, Ned pressed a hand over his eyes, trying to block out the rising sun and the guilt that illuminated every corner of his conscience. There was no turning back. With a sharp exhale, he guided the children to drink from the stream. He tore a piece of bread from the small provisions he'd carried in his saddlebag. They ate in silence, interrupted only by the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. Somewhere, a bird sang a lonely note. The boy clung to his sister, and the girl glanced warily at Ned. She was no older than 9 or 10, and yet her posture held a quiet determination that reminded him oddly of Lyanna. When their brief rest was done, Ned stood and brushed off his cloak. He forced himself to meet the girl's eyes. "Are you ready to ride again?" Her voice emerged in a hoarse whisper. "Yes, my lord." The boy said nothing, but his lip quivered, and Ned patted his small shoulder gently, mustering the softest smile he could manage. "We're going north for now," he said. "The road is long, and we must be careful, but I'll keep you safe. I swear it." The girl inclined her head in a gesture of thanks. She helped her brother mount. The horse then scrambled up herself, and Ned climbed on behind. He glanced south one last time, where King's Landing lay hidden behind the undulating hills and the city walls that dwarfed the horizon. Smoke still hung in the air, faint and ashen in the rising sun. Robert was gone. Everything had changed in a single, bloody stroke. They set off toward the Kingsroad, though Ned had no intention of following that main thoroughfare for long. It would be the first place the Crown's men would search once they discovered the children missing. And though it broke his heart, Ned suspected some of his own northern bannermen might not stand by him if they learned he had slain Robert. The realm was complicated that way, loyalties changed with the wind. He hoped that Jon Arryn might suspect the truth but keep silent. Lord Arryn had been like a second father to both Ned and Robert. What would Jon do when he learned of Robert's death? The question gnawed at Ned. Would Jon condemn him? Or would he reflect upon the horrors that Robert had set in motion? Ned could not be sure. Perhaps he would never see the Eyrie or its lord again. That might be best. Morning stretched on, and they rode through farmland battered by war, passing the occasional cluster of peasants trying to rebuild after the sacking. None paid them much heed, for a traveling knight with 2 children was not so unusual in these uncertain times, especially if one's face was half hidden by a cowl. By midday, the sun blazed overhead, and Ned decided they should keep off the main roads entirely. He guided the horse across a series of meadows and thin patches of woodland. If fortune smiled, no one would chance upon them. He tried to maintain a brisk pace, but the children were exhausted and the mare needed rest. The second time they stopped, the boy was so weary that Ned had to lift him gently down from the saddle, where he promptly curled up on the grass and closed his eyes. The girl stayed alert, though Ned could see her trembling from fatigue. He handed her his own water skin. "Drink," he told her. "We'll be safer soon." She studied his face as if searching for cracks in his composure. "Why did you save us?" she asked, voice wavering. Ned's throat tightened. "Because no child should die for the sins of their forebears," he said. "And because if I didn't, I'm not sure there would be any honor left in the world." Her eyes glistened with tears she tried not to shed. My mother. Do you know?" she swallowed, and her gaze darted away. "She's gone, isn't she?" Ned thought of Queen Riella, the rumors that she had died birthing Daenerys on Dragonstone, or the confusion surrounding the Mad King's final days. Even the details about Princess Elia Martell and her children had been bleak, though confusion reigned as to who survived. He didn't know enough to give the girl comfort. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I believe she was lost. But you're still here." She blinked hard, refusing to cry. For a moment, Ned thought she looked impossibly strong for one so young. She drew in a breath and nodded. The day wore on. They pressed northward through quiet fields and sparse woods, crossing narrow streams and skirting small hamlets. Sometimes they heard the distant sound of hooves or saw rising dust on a road that might indicate a patrol. Ned guided the horse off into a copse of trees each time, waiting until the danger passed. Each time, his heart thudded with dread that this might be the moment they were discovered. But fortune still walked with them. Sometime in late afternoon, they came upon an old stone bridge spanning a small river that fed into the Blackwater Rush. The structure looked half-crumbled, scarcely used, flanked by trees grown thick with brush. Ned urged the mare forward across the mossy stones. On the other side, an abandoned cottage squatted near the riverbank, its thatch roof partially collapsed. He dismounted to check if it offered any sort of shelter. The cottage proved to be empty, with old straw on the floor and a gaping hole in one wall that let in the afternoon sun. Still, it was a place to rest that wasn't out in the open. "We'll stay here tonight," Ned told the children. "It isn't much, but it'll keep us hidden." The girl nodded, and the boy, bleary-eyed with weariness, stood clinging to her hand. He still hadn't spoken a word. Ned led them inside, spreading a blanket from his saddlebag on the straw. Then he gave them dried meat and a little cheese. The children ate in silence. Outside, the wind rustled the tall grass near the river. Ned tethered the mare beneath a lean-to behind the cottage, where she could graze on what grass was left. At last, as dusk began to settle, Ned slumped against the rough wall of the cottage, pressing his forehead to the stone. His nerves felt as though they'd been flayed raw. His hands still shook whenever he remembered Robert's face, the final glimmer of recognition. The price of saving these children had been hideously high, and this was only the beginning of the cost he would bear. The girl's small voice drifted to him. "My name is Daenerys," she whispered. Ned turned, heart twisting. Daenerys Targaryen, he realized with a start that the child's identity was thus confirmed. He felt a pang of relief that she had survived whatever turmoil had come upon the capital. For all the talk of Targaryens being monstrous or mad, she was just a frightened girl. "Daenerys," he murmured, giving a curt bow of his head as he might to a highborn lady. Then he glanced at the boy, who was dozing against her side. "And your brother?" She stroked his hair gently. "Viserys." Ned nodded. "The last children of House Targaryen, thought to be hunted to extinction." "You're safe with me," he said. "I promise." She studied his face for a long moment, then said, "Thank you, my lord." There was no trace of suspicion now, only a tentative gratitude. She laid a gentle hand on her brother's shoulder. He stirred, then glanced up. Ned gazed at them both, guilt and fierce protectiveness warring within him. "Try to rest," he advised. "We have a long journey ahead." They curled up on the blanket, exhausted beyond measure, while Ned stood watch at the broken cottage door. Through the gap, he could see the sky turning a bruised purple, the first stars peeking through the veil of twilight. The burden of watchfulness was a welcome distraction from the swirl of memories. This lonely vantage, with half a wall for shelter, was now his sentinel station. He would not sleep. Sleep might bring nightmares of Robert's death, or worse, he might fail to protect them if danger arrived. But the night passed quietly. A few times Ned heard distant calls of nocturnal birds or the rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth. Nothing more. At one point, the boy whimpered in his sleep, so Daenerys soothed him, humming a lullaby Ned didn't recognize, a soft, melodic tune that might have come from the courts of Dragonstone or King's Landing. Ned's chest tightened at the fragility of it all. He wondered how the realm had come to this, the butchery of children, the madness of kings, the betrayal of long-held friendships. As dawn broke, Ned roused the children and they set out again. Each new day was a test of caution, each step a potential for discovery. The roads between King's Landing and the Trident teemed with soldiers returning from the war, mercenaries seeking plunder, and outlaws taking advantage of the chaos. Ned steered clear of them all, traveling by lesser-known paths. They passed farmland, orchard groves, and eventually reached hills that sloped gently north. In the evenings, they found whatever shelter they could, a barn loft one night, a roadside shrine the next. Ned told the children little of his plan, partly because he did not yet know precisely where they would end up, only that he needed to get them far from the capital. He considered heading to the Eyrie, but with the realm in turmoil, that might be risky. He considered the Neck, but that was still too close to those who might chase them. In the deepest recess of his mind, he harbored the idea of taking them north, beyond Winterfell, to the quiet recesses of the Wolf's Wood, or even further, to the last hearth or bare island, where few traveled. Hiding two silver-haired children might be easier in a land where the loyalty to House Stark was strongest, but it still wasn't guaranteed. Perhaps they would need to sail across the narrow sea from White Harbor. The possibilities spun through his mind at night, leaving him sleepless. On the fifth day, while they were riding through a forest of tall pines, Ned noticed the girl, Daenerys, was leaning precariously in her saddle, eyes half-lidded. The boy, Viserys, clung to her waist, but he, too, looked barely awake. They needed proper rest. Ned guided them deeper into the woods until they found a small clearing near a stream, hidden from the main path by thick underbrush. There, he helped them dismount. Daenerys swayed as her feet touched the ground, unsteady. Ned caught her elbow before she could fall. "We'll stay here tonight," he said gently. "I'll gather some firewood." Viserys didn't complain, only sank onto a patch of moss, his head lolling with exhaustion. The war had robbed them of any sense of normalcy. The boy was perhaps 4 or 5, but the shock in his eyes made him seem older and younger at once, a small child forced to confront unimaginable loss. After tying the horse, Ned ventured into the surrounding forest to collect kindling. As he gathered branches, he reflected on how quiet the children had become. Neither seemed to know how to mourn. They rarely asked questions, as if too afraid to hear the answers. Ned tried to provide comfort, but he was painfully aware that he had robbed them of the chance to reclaim their throne or avenge their parents. Yet what good was vengeance if it meant no life left to live? If Robert had discovered them, it would have been a swift and brutal end. He returned to the clearing, arms laden with sticks. Daenerys helped arrange them, her small hands trembling. Ned struck flint to steel until a spark caught, and soon a modest flame flickered. The warm glow touched their faces. For a while, they just sat, letting the heat soothe away the day's chill. Finally, Daenerys spoke, her voice subdued. "Where do we truly go?" Ned prodded the fire with a stick, watching the embers swirl. In the dim orange light, he saw the reflection of the flames dancing in her violet eyes. He wished she could be anywhere else, someplace free of war and treachery. But Westeros was not so forgiving. "We head north," he said, at last deciding to reveal part of his intention. "I have family there." Her brow furrowed. "But won't they be angry? You saved us. The realm wanted us dead." A pang of guilt stabbed through him. He thought of his brother Brandon, of Rickard Stark, of how House Targaryen's actions under the Mad King had led to their deaths. And now Ned had taken a life himself, though not in vengeance but in an effort to protect the children of that same House Targaryen. The irony was not lost on him. "There are good people in the north," Ned said gently. "They'll understand that children are not to blame for their father's sins. And if they don't," he exhaled slowly, "then we'll find another way." She hugged her knees, the firelight turning her silver-blonde hair golden. "Why would you risk so much for us? Robert was your friend, wasn't he?" Ned swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "He was. But war changes people. Robert would not have spared you. He believed it necessary to end House Targaryen. I couldn't let that happen to children." His voice trembled. "That doesn't make what I did right. But I did it to protect you." Viserys, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, lifted his gaze, his eyes shimmering with tears in the fire's glow. "You killed the usurper?" he asked, voice small. Ned nodded, knowing how complicated that question was. "I did." A moment of silence followed, broken only by the crackle of flames. Viserys pursed his lips, uncertainty flickering in his expression. He was old enough to grasp the meaning of kings and rebels, but too young to truly understand the magnitude of everything that had happened. Daenerys placed an arm around him, drawing him close. Ned sighed, wishing he could shield them from the hard truths that lay ahead. "It's best we don't speak of it," he said quietly. "Not until we're safe." Neither child replied. They curled up near the warmth of the fire, the day's fatigue pulling them under. Ned stayed awake, standing guard as he had every night. Yet the forest was silent with no sign of pursuers. He stared at the flickering coals, seeing Robert's face in the dancing shapes of light and shadow. He felt the weight of that betrayal in every breath. But he set his jaw. If his soul must be stained with that guilt forever, so be it. They traveled onward the next day, forging deeper into the rolling hills that eventually gave way to the riverlands. Ned avoided the major roads near Harrenhal, where the rubble and scorched fields testified to the recent battles. Sometimes they spied knights or soldiers on the horizon, but Ned always steered clear. More and more, he found himself looking over his shoulder, bracing for the moment the realm discovered King Robert had been murdered and started hunting the one who did it. But word traveled slowly in the chaos of war. Perhaps the lords believed Robert had simply fallen in battle, or the Targaryen loyalists had assassinated him. Maybe Tywin Lannister would even claim the throne, forging some alliance. Ned didn't know. The thought set his jaw on edge. Riding north one evening, they skirted a muddy track that led to a village half-burned by raiders. They found an inn still standing at the village's edge. Ned needed new provisions and, if possible, more suitable clothing for the children. Their silver hair was too conspicuous. Dany, as he had taken to calling her in his mind, wore a hooded cloak, but any slip could reveal her identity. The same for Viserys. Dismounting, Ned made sure the children remained hidden behind a small outbuilding while he entered the inn. It was a humble place with a crooked sign bearing a faded depiction of a lamb. Inside, a tired innkeeper eyed Ned warily but brightened when Ned slid a few silver stags across the counter. "Traveling with my wards," Ned said, sticking close to a half-truth. "They're resting outside. We've come a long way." The innkeeper nodded, glancing at Ned's worn cloak and hint of northern accent. "War's been rough on everyone. We've had men come through pillaging, though most have moved on." "I'm sorry," Ned replied earnestly. "We won't linger." He purchased some bread, smoked fish, and small beer, as well as 2 worn but serviceable cloaks of dark wool that the innkeeper had on hand, presumably left behind by other travelers. Ned hoped these new cloaks might provide the children better cover, especially if they pulled the hoods low. When the innkeeper asked no further questions, Ned breathed a sigh of relief. He thanked the man and left, grateful that the chaos of war made strangers less inquisitive, even if it also made them suspicious. He brought the supplies around the back of the inn. Daenerys and Viserys sat against the wall, both looking weary. Ned handed them the new cloaks. Viserys took his uncertainly, running a small hand over the coarse fabric. Dany slipped hers on, drawing the hood over her pale hair. She managed a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you," she murmured. They ate some of the bread and fish, then continued on their journey before the sun dipped too low. Ned wanted to put more distance between them and any major roads. The children's new cloaks were a small measure of relief. Perhaps if someone glimpsed them, they wouldn't immediately notice Targaryen coloring. Still, caution was paramount. Thus, day blended into day. They slept hidden in forests or alongside hedgerows. Rain came, turning the dirt paths to mud, chilling them to the bone. Ned scrounged for what shelter he could. Despite everything, the children's spirits seemed to hold, buoyed perhaps by youthful resilience. Daenerys would sometimes hum a tune or speak softly to Viserys, reassuring him that they were safe with Ser Ned. Ned never corrected her, though it tugged at his conscience every time she called him Ser. He was no knight, and he had done a deed that no knight would be proud of. As they ventured farther north, a shift in the air signaled a nearing of cooler climes. The farmland gave way to rolling hills dotted with stands of birch and aspen. They crossed the Trident at a shallow ford one crisp morning. The water was frigid, but the horse managed to pull them all across without mishap. On the far side, Ned caught a glimpse of the Tower of the Twins in the distance, the seat of House Frey. He steered well clear, not wanting to encounter any lords just yet. Finally, more than 2 weeks after leaving King's Landing, they were well into the Neck, that swampy, treacherous region that separated the north from the rest of Westeros. Here, the ground grew boggy, mosquitoes swarmed, and strange calls echoed across the marshes. But Ned knew the Neck better than most. He guided them carefully along the causeways that rose above the worst of the quagmire. There were a few hidden paths known to the Crannogmen, the small-statured folk loyal to House Reed. If they encountered any of those watchers of the marsh, Ned hoped his name as a Stark might keep them safe. It was near sunset when they paused by a cluster of half-submerged trees. Gnarly roots twisted up from the murky water. The children stared at the bogs with wide eyes. Ned saw their expressions. Uneasy, but also a bit entranced. The Neck had a haunting beauty to it, if one knew how to see it. Daenerys asked quietly, "Is it much farther to the north?" Ned considered. "A fair distance yet. But once we pass the Neck, The land opens up into rolling plains and forests. The air is colder, and in winter, snows blanket everything. That's where I'm from, Winterfell. His chest grew tight at the memory of that ancient castle. Its gray stone walls, the hot springs that kept it warm even in the coldest winters. Could he ever return home after what he had done? Or was that life forever lost? Viserys, who stood beside his sister, looked up at Ned. "Will we live there?" he asked, a note of fear or hope in his voice. Ned hesitated. He wanted to promise them safety and a good home, but he did not know if that was possible. "I hope to find a safe place for you," he managed. "But we must be cautious. You understand that?" The boy nodded, though it was clear he did not fully grasp the dangers. Daenerys, however, seemed to grasp that their future hung on a very precarious thread. She simply whispered, "We understand." They pressed on. Sunset stained the sky in oranges and purples, reflecting on the swampy waters. At times, the horse slogged through mud that threatened to suck at its hooves. Mosquitoes buzzed relentlessly, biting exposed skin. Ned swatted them away, urging the children to keep their hoods up. By nightfall, they found higher ground beneath a half-dead oak. There, they made camp, the boggy water lapping at the edges of a small patch of firm land. Ned built a tiny fire, mindful that they didn't want to draw attention. As they ate a meager dinner of hard bread and dried fish, Daenerys spoke softly. "Sir Ned," she began, then paused, gathering her courage. "Have you ever killed a dragon?" Ned blinked, taken aback by the question. He saw the worry in her eyes, the fear that perhaps he would turn on them, too. "No," he answered, gently. "I've never even seen a living dragon." Her gaze flicked to her brother. "Our house used to ride them a long time ago. That's what my mother told me." Ned nodded. "That was before even my grandfather was born." He tried to keep his voice reassuring. "No one has seen a real dragon in ages." She nodded, though he could see her imagination turning over. Perhaps she was mourning the loss of a legacy she'd barely understood. House Targaryen was once the mightiest in the realm, dragons circling the skies. Now only 2 frightened children remained of that ancient bloodline. 2 children that the realm might try to exterminate if they were discovered. Viserys leaned his head against Daenerys' shoulder, half asleep. "I want a dragon," he mumbled. "I want to go home." The words twisted Ned's heart. Where was home for these children now? King's Landing was lost to them, as was Dragonstone. Even the great fortress of Summerhall was long gone. "This is your home for the moment," Ned said quietly. "Wherever we can find safety." Neither child replied. The crackle of the small fire filled the silence. Ned kept watch once more, letting the children drift into an uneasy sleep. He gazed up at the sky, dotted with stars that shimmered over the watery expanse of the neck. He tried to picture the future. What if they made it to Winterfell? Could he conceal them in some remote keep or stronghold? Would the Northern Lords remain loyal, or would they be outraged at the murder of King Robert? And how would the realm respond once the truth inevitably emerged? He did not know, but he would face it. Whatever the consequences, he would not surrender these children to death. By the time dawn arrived, thick fog rolled over the wetlands, making visibility poor. Ned took advantage of the cover, guiding the horse carefully onward. Daenerys clung to the saddle, Viserys seated in front of her, both draped in those dark cloaks. Occasionally, he heard water lapping or the splash of some swamp creature darting away. Once, he caught sight of a curious crannogman, half hidden among the reeds, watching them. Ned raised a hand in greeting, but the man simply blinked and vanished into the mist, likely uncertain what to make of them. 4 days, they traversed the neck's meandering causeways. At times, they detoured when the path was flooded or blocked by fallen trees. Slowly, they edged nearer to Moat Cailin, the ancient fortress that stood as the southern gate to the north. When they were within a day's ride of the ruin, Ned grew particularly cautious. Moat Cailin was often manned by northern men, watchers who guarded against invasions from the south. If word had reached them of Robert's death, if they suspected Ned Stark of foul play, This could be a dangerous crossing. But if they remained ignorant of the truth, Ned might be able to slip through, or at least reason with them as the warden of the North's heir. They took another night to rest in a patch of dry ground, ringed by towering reeds. Late into the night, Ned heard distant howling, wolves perhaps, though they sounded far off. Daenerys stirred, awakened by the sound, but he murmured assurances that the wolves would not harm them. Satisfied, she drifted back to sleep, though she did not let go of Viserys' hand. Ned marveled at how fiercely protective she was of her brother, even as she, too, was just a child. Come morning, they rode out once more. A damp chill clung to the air and dew-coated their cloaks. As the haze lifted, Ned saw the broken silhouette of Moat Cailin ahead, crumbling towers jutting from the bog, moss and vines crawling over ancient stone. He remembered the old tales of how that fortress, held by a handful of Northmen, could repel entire southern armies. Now it was half-ruined, haunted by the ghosts of centuries past. Carefully, Ned guided them around the fortress. He knew a path that skirted the ruins, a narrow causeway that might avoid any posted lookouts. The children stayed silent, sensing his tension. The horses' hooves squelched in the mud. The water's surface rippled with each step. Once a shape moved in the murk, likely an alligator or some swamp creature. It disappeared before Ned could identify it. They were nearly past the ruins when a voice rang out. Halt! Who goes there? Ned froze. Above them, atop a crumbling tower, stood two men in cloaks of dark gray wool, each with a spear. Clearly, the men had noticed their movement through the bog. Ned cursed inwardly for failing to see them first. He considered fleeing, but the swampy terrain would not allow for a swift escape. And these were likely Northmen, perhaps even loyal to House Stark. That might be his only advantage. He raised a hand in a sign of peace. We mean no harm. One of the men hefted his spear. Identify yourself. Ned swallowed, glancing at the children. He could see their wide eyes. If these men recognized Targaryen exiles, it could all be over. Slowly, he pushed back his hood, revealing his face. I am Eddard Stark, he called. The words felt heavy in his mouth, given his betrayal of the realm's new king. Son of Lord Rickard, brother to Brandon. A hush fell over the men. They exchanged glances. Then one shouted back, Lord Eddard? Aye, we heard you fought with Robert Baratheon in the rebellion. But is the war not ended? What brings you here? Ned took a breath. The war is won, he lied by omission, but I ride north on urgent business. I would pass in peace. The men murmured among themselves. Then they lowered their spears. As you say, my lord, one of them called. Welcome home. Ned inclined his head, relief washing over him. He nudged the horse forward, guiding the children carefully along the causeway that wound past the old towers. The watchers stood aside, though they still appeared curious. Ned did not slow to chat. He worried they might notice the small figures behind him, question them. But the men did not press the issue. They seemed eager enough to let a Stark pass without delay. As the ruins faded behind them, Ned's heart pounded with the enormity of what he had done. He had just identified himself openly. Word might spread that Eddard Stark had passed by with two cloaked companions. If King Robert's death had been discovered, and it surely must have been by now, some would begin to connect the threads. But there was nothing for it. He had to continue, trusting in fate. They rode onward, the terrain gradually shifting as the swampy ground gave way to firmer soil. Soon they saw pine trees and cedar groves, the first true signs that they had entered the north. The air grew cooler, the wind sharper. Ned inhaled, feeling an ache of familiarity. This was home, the land of his ancestors, the land he loved. Yet he arrived not as a victorious son, but as a betrayer fleeing retribution, carrying with him the Targaryen children. Daenerys must have sensed his mood, for she spoke softly as they rode. Is this your home, Sir Ned? It's beautiful. Ned glanced around at the tall pines, the rolling green, the sky that stretched wide and free. Though the north was often called a harsh land, he did find beauty here. Yes, he said. It's home. Viserys peered over the mare's side as if expecting to see something extraordinary. All he saw were pine needles and the faint hush of wind. Will it be ours too? He asked timidly. Ned did not know how to answer. Finally, he said, you will be safe here, for a time. The boy frowned but nodded. Daenerys cast Ned a grateful look as if sensing how difficult his position was. She had grown quieter in recent days, but not out of distrust. It seemed more like acceptance of their circumstances. She was a Targaryen princess in a land that might see her as an enemy. Ned wondered what future lay ahead for her. A marriage alliance? A life in secrecy? The possibilities churned in his mind. They pressed on, following the Kingsroad north. Now that they were in the north, travelers were sparse. The weather grew colder with each passing mile. Occasionally, they stopped at small villages or crofters' cottages where Ned's name was recognized and he could secure provisions without suspicion. People spoke of the rebellion's end, celebrating Robert Baratheon's victory. No one yet mentioned Robert's murder. Possibly word had not reached this far, or if it had, perhaps no one spoke of it openly. In the north, news traveled slowly, especially after a war. Eventually, the road climbed into a region of dense forest. The sky had turned leaden, heavy with clouds that threatened rain or snow. Ned halted on the verge of the woods, taking stock. If they continued on the main road, they would reach Winterfell in a few days. But was it wise to ride straight to the castle? He would have to face his people, face his siblings. Benjen, maybe Lyanna if she yet lived, though rumor had said she died. Or had she? The rebellion's final days had been so chaotic, Ned had not even confirmed her fate. If the stories were true, Lyanna had died at the Tower of Joy. The thought sent a jolt of grief through him. He had lost so much, and now he carried the burden of a friend's blood on his sword. Perhaps it would be better to turn west, toward the deepwood moat or the mountains, find a remote holdfast. But that too carried dangers. He had no allies there aside from distant bannermen who might be as likely to hand him over to the new powers in the realm as to protect him. He gazed at the children. Daenerys stared back, a question in her eyes. A faint drizzle began to fall, adding to the chill. Ned made his decision. He would go to Winterfell. It was home, and he could not wander forever. Perhaps there, in the ancient halls of the Stark lineage, he could find the clarity he needed. Maybe he could hide the children for a time or find a way to send them somewhere truly safe. So they continued along the Kingsroad, though Ned's unease grew with every passing league. Nightfall came, and they made camp beneath towering oaks, building a small fire to ward off the cold. Daenerys and Viserys huddled together for warmth. Ned gave them his spare blankets, choosing to sit by the fire in his cloak. Even so, the chill seeped into his bones. Winter was months away, but in the north, cold was ever-present. The next day, the drizzle turned into a steady rain, pelting them. Ned cursed under his breath. The road became slick with mud. The horse trudged onward, its mane dripping. Daenerys and Viserys clung to each other, shivering beneath soaked cloaks. Ned searched desperately for shelter, eventually finding a small hunter's hut nestled among the trees. It was empty, likely abandoned during the war. They hurried inside. The roof leaked in places, but it was better than the open road. Ned managed to coax a small fire to life in the fireplace. The children crowded around it, attempting to dry off. He gave them what little remained of their provisions, bread that had gone soggy at the edges, some salt beef, and a flask of water. Then he removed the horse's saddle and rubbed the mare down, trying to keep her warm. The rain pattered on the hut's roof and water ran in rivulets down the walls where the thatch had worn thin. That night, as the storm raged outside, Ned lay awake, wondering if he would ever find peace again. He listened to the rain drip through the roof, to the children's ragged breathing as they slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Robert's final moments. In a flash, he would see the red splash of blood on the sheets, hear that last gasp. He would see the betrayal in Robert's eyes. Each time, he jerked awake, sweating despite the cold. In the early hours before dawn, the rain tapered off. Ned rose, stiff and sore. He stepped outside the hut to relieve himself, then took a moment to breathe in the damp forest air. The leaves glistened with raindrops and the morning light filtered through the canopy, turning the world a muted gray-green. In the hush, he heard the drip of water from the branches. He felt an overwhelming desire to see Winterfell again, to stand beneath the heart tree in the godwood, to find some kind of absolution. But absolution might not be possible. He had committed an unforgivable act, even if for a just cause. The old gods would judge him, or perhaps they would remain silent. Maybe in time he would learn to carry this guilt. When he returned inside, Daenerys was stirring. She rubbed her eyes, gazing at him with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Did you sleep?" she asked softly. Ned forced a small smile. "A bit," he lied. "We should move on soon." She nodded, and after a breakfast of leftover bread, they saddled up and continued north. The forest gradually thinned, revealing rolling plains dotted with isolated farmsteads. Smoke curled from distant chimneys. Ned kept them off the main road as much as possible, wary of travelers or potential guards. But eventually, the time came when the tall walls of Winterfell appeared on the horizon, rising from the surrounding farmland like a silent sentinel. Ned halted the horse on a small rise, letting the children take in the sight. "That," he said, his voice catching in his throat, "is Winterfell. A great castle of gray stone built upon ancient hot springs that sent wisps of steam skyward in the colder months. Even from a distance, Ned could see the familiar outline of its walls, the towers he had known since childhood. Memories rushed through him, playing in the courtyard with his brother Brandon, riding out to the nearby Wolfswood with his father the day he left to foster in the Eyrie. A lifetime ago. He glanced at the children. Daenerys wore an uncertain expression as though she sensed how momentous this moment was. Viserys clung to her cloak, peering out at the castle with wide eyes. Ned inhaled slowly. This was it, the place he had always thought to return to in triumph or with stories of honor. Instead, he came bearing a terrible secret, the blood of a king on his hands and 2 Targaryen children he had sworn to protect. The next hours would decide everything. Would the castle's garrison accept him without question? Would the maester or the castellans suspect the truth of Robert's fate? And how in the name of the old gods could he hide Daenerys and Viserys here? Still, there was no going back. So he nudged the horse forward, heart pounding. As they drew closer, he could see the gatehouse, the portcullis raised. Guards in stark livery stood watch, though they did not appear to be on high alert. Perhaps news of Robert's death had not yet reached them, or if it had, they did not associate it with Ned. The notion filled him with both relief and a fresh surge of guilt. When they approached, one guard stepped forward. He was a bearded man with a weather-worn face. He squinted at Ned, then abruptly straightened. "My Lord Stark," he exclaimed in surprise. "You've returned. The war, is it ended?" Ned forced a stoic nod. "It is ended," he said gravely. "Let me in, if you please. I bring guests." The guard nodded, signaling for the portcullis to be fully raised. Another guard peered curiously at the cloaked figures behind Ned, but said nothing. The small party rode into Winterfell's courtyard, where stable hands rushed forward. Ned dismounted and helped the children down. Their eyes darted around at the wide yard, the looming towers, the bustle of servants. The smell of straw, horses, and the faint sulfur scent from the hot springs enveloped them. A steward hurried forward, bowing. "My lord, we did not know you were coming. Should we rouse, eh?" Ned cut him off gently. "Please keep our arrival quiet for now. It's been a long journey and I'm weary. My wards have traveled far." The steward eyed the children but did not pry. Instead, he bowed again. "As you wish, my lord. We'll see to your horse and prepare chambers." Ned inclined his head. "Thank you." He placed a hand on Daenerys' shoulder, guiding her and Viserys across the courtyard. A few servants paused to stare, but the hush of Ned's return seemed to keep them from bombarding him with questions. He led the children toward a side entrance. He knew well which corridors would be least traveled at this hour, especially if most of the household believed he was still off with Robert in King's Landing. Inside the castle's stone corridors, echoes of footsteps followed them. Their footfalls on the flagstones resonated, reminding Ned of simpler days. Daenerys looked around wide-eyed. Viserys clutched her hand. "It's so big," he murmured. Ned guided them deeper into the castle, heading for a quiet wing near the maester's tower. There were some unused guest rooms that might suffice. At each turn, he anticipated confronting some old friend or retainer, but luck held. They only passed a pair of kitchen servants who, at the sight of Lord Stark, simply bowed and hurried on. Finally, Ned stopped at a small chamber that was clean but unoccupied. He pushed open the heavy door and motioned the children inside. It was a simple room with a bed, a hearth, and a single window overlooking the courtyard. A second, even smaller adjoining room was beyond a narrow door containing another bed. Likely it was meant for a servant or squire. "This will be yours," Ned said, helping Daenerys remove her cloak. She looked weary, but her gaze darted about, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Viserys hovered behind her, his eyes drawn to the hearth. Perhaps he yearned for warmth after so many cold nights outdoors. Ned closed the door behind them and let out a breath. They had made it, but they were not safe yet. If word spread that Eddard Stark had returned with 2 silver-haired children, trouble would follow. He needed to confide in someone, Maester Luwin perhaps, or someone he trusted completely. He needed a plan for how to keep these children hidden. For the moment, though, exhaustion threatened to drag him down. He turned to them with a weary smile. "You can rest here. I'll see that food and fresh clothing are brought. It may be best if you stay out of sight for now. Do you understand?" Daenerys nodded, her expression solemn. Viserys looked uncertain, but he did not argue. Ned's heart twisted at the thought of confining them to a room, but it was necessary until he found a better solution. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'll try to make this as comfortable as I can." With that, he left them, stepping back into the corridor. The castle felt both welcoming and alien to him now. So much had changed in so little time. He could practically hear the stones whisper questions he did not want to answer. Why? How dare you bring the blood of Targaryens here? Why have you betrayed your friend, your king? He pressed on, heading for the maester's tower. If anyone could advise him, it would be Maester Luwin, a man of learning and discretion. But as he descended a spiral staircase, a voice called out behind him, "Ned!" He froze, heart pounding. Turning, he saw Benjen Stark, his younger brother, standing at the foot of the stairs. Benjen's dark hair hung loose around his shoulders, and his face bore a look of shocked relief. "Ned!" he repeated, rushing up the steps. They embraced, the warmth of family washing over Ned. For a moment, Ned closed his eyes, letting the embrace steady him. When they parted, Benjen searched Ned's gaze. "We'd heard the war was won. Robert took the throne. But we expected you sooner." Ned swallowed. "I was delayed." He sought to keep his voice even. "Where is father?" Benjen's face darkened, grief flaring in his eyes. "Ned, father was executed by the Mad King. You know that. Word reached us before we ever heard you, and Robert marched south." Pain twisted in Ned's gut anew. Of course he knew, but in his fatigue his mind had gone to an impossible hope. Yes," he said, voice tight. "I meant, how fares the castle? Are we all well?" Benjen nodded slowly, though he studied Ned's face with concern. "We manage. The war is over now, so we expected you to come back in triumph. Is Robert not with you?" Ned's chest constricted. He forced his tone to remain calm. Robert remained in King's Landing. There was business for him to attend to. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Benjen frowned, but accepted it. "I see. And you? You've come alone." Ned forced a small, strained smile. "I brought 2 wards. Children orphaned by the war. They need sanctuary." At that, Benjen's eyes softened with sympathy. "We have plenty of space here, you know that. You've a kind heart, Ned. If only you knew," Ned thought. Aloud he said, "I need to speak with Maester Luwin. There are details. Could you keep my return quiet for just a little while?" "I'm weary, Benjen." His brother placed a reassuring hand on Ned's shoulder. "Of course," he said, though curiosity flickered behind his eyes. "We'll talk more later, yes? I've much to tell you, and I'd like to know all that happened in the south." Ned nodded, though his thoughts churned. "Later," he agreed. "I need rest first." Benjen squeezed his shoulder, then let him pass. As Ned continued onto the maester's chambers, he felt as though he were treading water in a rising tide. He had returned home, but the shadows of his choice followed him. The challenge now was to keep those shadows from devouring everything he held dear. When he reached Maester Luwin's domain, the slender man with gray robes and a chain collar looked up from a scroll. Surprise lit his eyes. "Lord Eddard." He rose, bowing slightly, then stepped forward to clasp Ned's forearm in greeting. "I did not know you had arrived." Ned managed a weary smile. "Just now, Maester. I apologize for the suddenness. We must speak in private." Luwin's brow furrowed, but he nodded. "Of course. Come in." Ned entered the chamber, the walls lined with shelves of books and jars. The faint aroma of parchment, ink, and herbs filled the air. Luwin closed the door behind him. "Tell me, my lord, what troubles you?" Ned settled into a chair, feeling as though the weight of the entire realm bore down on him. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Much has happened. Robert Baratheon is dead, Maester." Luwin gasped, eyes widening. "Dead? But how?" "The last raven from King's Landing said the city had fallen. There was talk that Robert took the throne." Ned interrupted, his voice thick. "He did. He was king for a short time, but he meant to kill the Targaryen children. I could not allow it." His gaze fell to the floor, unable to meet Luwin's eyes. "I took his life, and I brought the Targaryen children north." Silence stretched. Luwin's face went pale. He sank into a nearby stool, his chain clinking softly. "You did, Ned." "Ned, the realm—" "I know," Ned said hoarsely. "The realm will call me traitor, kinslayer of a sort. Robert was like a brother to me, but I could not let him butcher those children. So I acted. Now I need your help to keep them safe." Luwin swallowed hard. He glanced around as though seeking the right words from his shelves of knowledge. "This is momentous. If word spreads, the new regime, Stannis Baratheon, perhaps, or whoever claims the throne, will not rest until they find the Targaryens. And they will name you a criminal." "I am aware," Ned said softly, "but there is no undoing it. I must protect those children. Can we hide them here?" Luwin stared for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You are the Lord of Winterfell now, I suppose, with Brandon and your father gone." His eyes wavered with sadness. "We can try. But the staff, the guards, they'll talk, my lord." People will notice two silver-haired children wandering the halls. Ned exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I know. We'll need a cover story. Perhaps we can say they are wards from a lesser house in the Vale or the Stormlands. We can keep them from public view as much as possible, have them remain in the castle's inner chambers. And if we must, I'll find a way to send them across the narrow sea where they can live free of the realm's vengeance. Luwin pursed his lips, considering. A tall order, my lord, but I will do my part. We must also prepare for the possibility that a raven will come with news of Robert's death, or that men loyal to the Baratheons or Lannisters might come north, searching. Ned nodded grimly. Yes. When that day comes, we'll face it. But until then, the children stay hidden. Luwin sighed, his shoulders sagging. You've taken on a great burden, Lord Eddard. I pray the old gods guide us all. Ned rose, clasping Luwin's arm. Thank you, Maester. I will not forget your counsel. With that, he left the chamber. Outside, the corridor stood empty, but Ned could imagine the countless ghosts of his past lurking in the shadows. His father, Brandon, even Robert. Especially Robert. He thought of the cold tombs in the crypts below Winterfell where the Stark ancestors slumbered. One day, Ned's bones would join them, and what would they say of him then? Would his statue hold a sword across its lap, as was tradition, marking him as an honorable lord? Or would the stonemason carve betrayal and sorrow into his features for all eternity? He did not know. All he knew was that he had saved 2 innocent lives, and he would carry the cost of it until his dying breath. If that meant living in hiding, if that meant forging lies and deceptions, if that meant being branded a traitor, so be it. He was Eddard Stark, and he would endure. Slowly, he made his way back to the small chamber where Daenerys and Viserys waited. Outside, he paused, drawing in a steadying breath. Then he opened the door to see the 2 children looking up at him. The last Targaryens. They were here, in Winterfell, under the protection of the man who had slain the very king who sought their end. Daenerys stood, her posture stiff with apprehension. Viserys huddled at the edge of the bed, his expression hesitant. Ned offered them a faint smile. You're safe, he said softly. Winterfell will shelter you, for as long as I can manage. We'll find a way. Daenerys swallowed, her eyes darting around the room. Then she stepped forward, taking Viserys' hand. Thank you, she whispered. We have no one else. Ned's throat tightened. He crouched to look her in the eye, and then Viserys. You have me, he promised. I know this isn't your home, but you'll be cared for here. You have my word. Viserys looked torn between relief and confusion. Daenerys nodded, tears glistening. Ned gently placed a hand on her shoulder. He hoped this moment would mark the beginning of something better. A life where these 2 innocents could grow without fear, unburdened by the sins of their house or the hatreds of the realm. Yet in the back of his mind, Ned felt the weight of what lay ahead. Secrets, whispers, threats from the south. The realm would not simply forget Robert Baratheon, nor rest while Targaryens lived. War might come again, this time aimed at Ned Stark and Winterfell. But if that was the price, he would pay it. He rose, stepping back. Rest, children. I'll bring food soon and clean clothes. For now, keep the door barred from the inside. We cannot risk being seen. They nodded, and he slipped out. In the corridor, he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. The memory of Robert's face haunted him still, but he clung to the hope that his choice, monstrous though it felt, would bring a kinder future for these children. A droplet of water dripped from the eaves outside, echoing through an open window. Ned lifted his gaze to the dim light filtering in. He was home, but everything had changed. And so the new story began, written in blood and honor, woven with secrets and the fragile trust of 2 Targaryen heirs who had nowhere else to go. Ned Stark bowed his head and whispered a silent prayer to the old gods. Then, squaring his shoulders, he set off through the halls of Winterfell. He would do whatever was necessary to keep his promise. And though history might condemn him for it, he would hold fast to the quiet conviction that mercy had guided his blade, and that, in a land too often ruled by cruelty, that mercy mattered above all else. Ned Stark closed the door carefully behind him and let out a long breath that shuddered in his chest. For the moment, Daenerys and Viserys Targaryen were safe in that small chamber, a refuge Ned had never imagined would exist within the very walls of Winterfell. He still could hardly believe that he had brought them here, that he had committed himself to the most dangerous secret in Westeros. Outside, the corridor felt drafty and quiet, as though holding its breath. Ned drew himself up, steeling his resolve. If the children were to stay hidden, he needed to be methodical and cautious, just as he had been on the perilous road north. He glanced down at his boots, still caked with mud from the journey. A wave of weariness crashed over him, but he knew rest would not come easily. Already, his mind roiled with plans and worries. How could he keep this hidden from the servants, the guards, even from his own brother? Benjen's presence here reminded Ned of the bonds he might have to break to preserve these children's lives. The weight of his guilt and the memory of Robert's blood spread across a bed in the Red Keep only added to his torment. Part of him longed to confess the entire truth to someone else, to share the burden. But how could he when the lives of 2 children and very likely his own family hung in the balance? He turned down the corridor toward his old chambers. It felt surreal to be back in the place where he'd grown up, every stone corridor alive with memories. Here was the window he and Brandon had once scrambled through as boys, sneaking out to race around the battlements. There was the tapestry father used to admire whenever he strode past. 1,000 small recollections rushed at Ned. With them came the sharpened awareness that he was no longer the honorable second son, but the new Lord of Winterfell, returning under the darkest possible secret. Before he could reach the stairs to his rooms, the steward Vayen Poole appeared, bowing respectfully. "My lord, word of your return spreads quickly. The cooks are preparing a hot meal, and the household wonders if you'll want a reception in the Great Hall. We weren't sure of your wishes." Ned shook his head. "No reception. I've had a long journey, Vayen, and I'm bone-tired. Let it be known that I want no fuss. A quiet meal will do. I must speak with Maester Luwin again soon, and then I'll rest." The steward bowed once more, concern creasing his face. "As you say, my lord." Ned offered a polite nod and continued on, every step in these stone corridors echoing with the knowledge that he'd returned a changed man. A killer of a king, a friend, under the banner of mercy. It was a contradiction that echoed in his chest whenever he drew breath. He entered his solar, a small, familiar room furnished with a hearth, a simple table, and a window overlooking the training yard. He unbuckled his sword belt, placing ice against the wall with a care that bordered on reverence. He stared at the great blade for a moment. It bore no visible bloodstain. He had cleaned it thoroughly, but no amount of scrubbing would remove the memory of Robert's last moment. Finally, he eased himself down into a chair and rested his arms on the table. The windows let in a pallid late afternoon light. The sky in the north was often overcast this time of year, and though it was not yet winter, a chill seeped through the stones. The hush stretched out around him, and he found his thoughts racing to Daenerys and Viserys, so young and frightened. He pictured the dread on the little boy's face, how Viserys had asked in a trembling voice if Ned had truly killed the usurper. The question haunted him. Could anyone, not least a child who had lost everything, understand the monstrous necessity of Ned's choice? His door creaked open quietly. Maester Luwin slipped in, accompanied by a lean servant carrying a tray. At Ned's nod, the servant placed a bowl of stew, fresh bread, and a cup of ale on the table, then bowed and took his leave. Luwin waited until the door closed before speaking in a hushed tone. "My lord," he began, folding his hands before him. "We must plan for how to conceal these 2 wards. You should know that Benjen, he suspects you carry a great burden. He came to me with questions." Ned rubbed his forehead. "Benjen's a good man. He'll accept that I returned with children orphaned by the war. But if I appear too evasive, he'll press harder. He always did have a keen nose for secrets, and if the rest of the castle sees those children, their Valyrian coloring may betray them," Luwin finished softly. Ned nodded. "You've the right of it. For now, they must stay in that chamber. They can't wander about. We'll bring them meals, clothes, anything they need, but we'll keep the household from talking. I told the children to bar the door from inside." Luwin sighed. "An uncertain arrangement at best, my lord, but for the moment it might suffice. In time, the staff might grow curious about the locked room. I can try to manage rotating servants who are trustworthy, so they deliver supplies without prying. Ned tore a piece of bread and dipped it into the stew, though his appetite was faint. See it done, and I'll speak with them soon to reassure them. They're frightened. He took a bite, swallowing mechanically. I also worry about the realm's reaction once ravens start arriving with the news of Robert's demise. I imagine chaos in King's Landing. Someone must have discovered his body by now. Luwin lowered his gaze. I fear so. The tale will spread quickly. Stannis Baratheon might stake his claim on the Iron Throne, or Renly, or someone else entirely. Lord Tywin Lannister may move swiftly if he senses opportunity. We must prepare for the possibility that accusations of foul play will arise. Ned nodded dully, stirring the stew with his spoon. They'll suspect Targaryen loyalists, he said, or some hidden plot. No one will guess it was me. But if rumor spreads that Targaryen children escaped the city, they could start to look in all corners. Luwin placed a gentle hand on Ned's arm. I know this weighs heavily on you, but you are home. This is your seat, your power. If you choose to remain silent, who in the north would challenge you? The words struck Ned as hollow comfort. I never wanted power, he murmured. Only to do right by my family, to protect the innocent. Now I've spilled the blood of my friend. I must live with that. He ate the rest of his meal in silence, Luwin standing by in quiet sympathy. When Ned finished, the maester cleared the dishes and left, promising to visit the children later with fresh linen and some simple attire. Once alone, Ned slumped in his chair, exhaustion creeping over him like a slow tide. He knew sleep would bring no peace, yet he had no choice but to try. He rose, stepping to the window. In the courtyard below, he saw a handful of guardsmen drilling with swords, the clash of steel carried faintly on the wind. A pair of stable boys led a horse through the muddy yard, chatting quietly. Life in Winterfell proceeded as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Did any of them sense the storm brewing on the horizon? At length, Ned shrugged off his cloak, loosened his tunic, and climbed onto the bed in the adjoining room. He lay staring at the rafters. His mind spun with visions of Robert's face, of 2 Targaryen children curled in fear, of Catelyn waiting for him at Riverrun, unaware of the dark turn the rebellion had taken. He wondered if he would ever see her again. Eventually, numbness seeped into his limbs, and he drifted into a restless slumber. He dreamed of the trident of battle cries and the crash of steel. He saw himself standing amid the mud and red-stained water, searching desperately for something. Then Robert appeared, warhammer in hand, blood in his eyes, accusing Ned of betrayal. A scream pierced the dream. Was it Robert's or Ned's own? And he jerked awake, covered in sweat. The sky beyond his window was dusk blue. He had slept through the remainder of the day. He rose, steadying himself as he swung his feet to the floor and splashed cold water on his face from a nearby basin. Night would soon fall. He needed to see how Daenerys and Viserys fared. He crept through the corridors, moving quietly so as not to draw attention. Most of the household would be at supper or winding down their tasks. Despite his caution, he encountered a handful of servants who greeted him with bows and lowered eyes. He responded politely, hoping no one noticed the tension coiled in his posture. At last, he reached the chamber he had given the children. He tapped lightly. A moment passed, and then the door creaked open. Daenerys peeked out, her eyes huge in the dim light of the corridor. She swiftly stepped back to admit him, and Ned slipped inside, drawing the door shut. The glow of a single candle lit the small space, revealing Viserys curled on the bed, half asleep, and a tray of half-eaten food that someone, likely Luwin, had brought. Daenerys looked up at him, whispering, "He's not feeling well, my lord. He says his stomach hurts. I tried to make him eat, but he wouldn't." Ned moved closer, his heart clenched with sympathy. Viserys' eyes flickered open at Ned's approach, but he said nothing. His skin appeared pale, and he clutched the blanket as if it were armor. War, loss, and the flight north, such a toll on a child so young. Ned knelt beside the bed. "How do you feel, lad?" Viserys mumbled. "Hurts. Cold." He squeezed his eyes shut. Ned put a hand on his forehead. It felt clammy rather than fevered, so perhaps the boy was simply exhausted and frightened. He looked over at Daenerys. "We'll ask Maester Luwin to brew him something for pain and to help him rest. He needs time." She nodded, her voice tight. "Thank you, my lord." Ned took a moment to glance around the room. Luwin had indeed delivered simple linen clothes, fresh blankets, and a basin of water. The 2 cloaks they'd worn during the journey were folded in a corner, still streaked with mud. Ned remembered the countless nights they had spent outdoors. Those children enduring hardships no children ever should. He turned back to Daenerys. "Has anyone else come to see you?" She shook her head. "Only the maester. He asked me if I wanted more food, if I felt unwell." He spoke kindly and left. No one else came. Relief coursed through Ned. So far, the secret seemed contained. "Good. We'll keep it that way." Her expression became pensive. After a pause, she asked, "Are you certain no one else here wants to hurt us?" Ned's throat tightened. "I'm certain," he said softly. "No one in Winterfell would dare harm children under my protection. You have my word." She watched him with that careful, assessing gaze he'd grown accustomed to during their journey. At last, she lowered her eyes. "I believe you." A rustle at the door made Ned's head jerk up, his pulse spiking, until it opened to reveal Maester Luwin. He carried a small clay cup that steamed faintly, its herbal scent drifting across the room. "Pardon the intrusion," he said in his gentle manner, "but I suspected Viserys might need this tonic." Ned nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Maester." He helped Viserys sit up enough to sip the liquid, which the boy did reluctantly, wincing at the taste. Then Ned motioned for the Maester to examine him. Look. And took Viserys' pulse, felt his brow, and nodded with quiet reassurance. "He is simply overstressed, my lord," Luwin murmured. "His body is recovering from hunger, fear, lack of proper rest. The tonic should help him sleep. Tomorrow we'll see if there's improvement." Ned gave Viserys a faint smile. "You'll be all right, lad. Just rest." Then, noticing Daenerys's drawn cheeks and reddened eyes, he touched her shoulder. "You too, princess. Get some sleep." She opened her mouth as if to say something else, but no words emerged. Instead, she gave a small nod and helped ease Viserys back onto the pillow. He was already drifting into an exhausted doze. Ned and Luwin slipped out into the corridor where Ned exhaled deeply. "Thank you, Maester," he repeated, "for everything." Luwin's tone was grave. "It is my duty and my vow to serve this house, my lord. However, I must warn you, if the Targaryen boy or girl ventures into the corridors and someone glimpses their hair or hears their names, the questions will multiply. We cannot keep them in that chamber forever." Ned grimaced. "I know. Let me think on a longer-term solution. For now, see that they remain in that room. Perhaps we can cut or dye their hair if we must pass them off as children of some distant northern branch. But that's a thought for another day." They parted ways. Ned felt the press of so many responsibilities that he could scarcely breathe. He made for the godwood, hoping the solitude beneath the heart tree might grant him a sliver of clarity. Dusk blanketed Winterfell, a few torches burning in the yard. He slipped through the courtyard, nodding to a guard, and entered the godwood. The hush within was thick, the murmur of leaves underscored by the quiet gurgle of the hot springs that threaded through the ancient grove. Ned walked the well-trod path until he reached the heart tree, a massive weirwood, its pale trunk etched with a face that gazed out with red sap eyes. He had prayed here often as a boy, listening for the old god's whispers. Now, faced with the enormity of his choices, he sank to his knees before the tree. He bowed his head, pressing his palm to the damp grass. He tried to speak, tried to ask for forgiveness or guidance, but the words clotted in his throat. Flashes of Robert's face, shock, pain, betrayal, filled his mind's eye. He swallowed, trembling. The memory of that single blow, the wet sound of steel striking flesh, would haunt him until the end of his days. Could the old gods understand why he had done it? Could they see the small forms of Daenerys and Viserys cowering in fear, their only crime being the legacy of their blood? He drew a shaky breath. "I pray I've done right," he whispered to the stillness. "I beg forgiveness if I have sinned beyond measure." The tree gave no answer, only its silent scrutiny. Ned listened to the wind, the rustle of leaves, the drip of water somewhere among the roots. This was the way of the old gods. Quiet, constant, unfathomable. They offered neither condemnation nor absolution. In that hush, Ned found a brittle kind of resolve. He had set his path. Now he must see it through. After a while, he rose, head bowed. The night around him felt colder than before, as though the north itself recognized the gravity of what he had done. Still, the stirring of the wind among the branches reminded him that time pressed onward, and so must he. He returned to the castle proper. The great hall was dimly lit now, most of the household having taken supper. Ned avoided it, not wishing to face the curiosity of so many eyes. Instead, he went to his solar, intending to review the ledgers or read something to distract himself. But as soon as he sat, the door swung open again, and in came Benjen. His younger brother's expression was anxious, a swirl of questions clearly burning behind his blue-gray eyes. Ned felt his stomach clench. He had hoped to avoid confrontation for at least a day or two. Yet here Benjen stood, determined to have his answers. "Ned," Benjen began quietly, "I've given you time and space, but I can't keep guessing. What truly happened in King's Landing? I've heard talk that Robert is now king, yet he's not with you. And you come back carrying some private burden. I've known you my whole life, brother. Something is wrong." Ned pressed his lips together, choosing his words with care. "The war ended, as you said, but it ended violently. King Aerys was overthrown. Robert took the throne. Then certain Targaryens were hunted down or killed. The memory of Elia Martell's fate, the rumored slaughter of Rhaenys and Aegon, made his chest tighten. Benjen nodded, folding his arms. "I know that much. But you returned alone." Ned steeled himself. A half-truth might be his only recourse. Robert has remained in the south to deal with the matters of governance. He and I had words, and I left sooner than expected. My betrothed is still in Riverrun, so I intended to regroup here before traveling on. It felt foul to lie about Robert's status, but he had no choice. Benjen's gaze narrowed. "Just words, Ned? You look as though you carry a heavier wound than that." A flash of bitterness rose in Ned's throat. "Many men died in that war. We lost Father and Brandon to the Mad King. Perhaps I'm just weary of fighting." Benjen inhaled as though to press further, but he held back, letting out a measured breath. "If you say so, I won't pry. But if you need my help, Ned, you'll tell me." Ned managed a tight nod. "If it becomes necessary." Benjen stared at him a moment longer, then seemingly resigned to accept Ned's reticence, he placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've changed. War does that, I suppose. Still, it's good to have you home." He gave Ned's shoulder a gentle squeeze before releasing him. "Winterfell needs its lord, and I need my brother." The genuine concern in Benjen's voice gnawed at Ned's guilt. But he merely answered, "I'm grateful for your loyalty, Ben. I truly am." His brother's eyes flicked about the room as though searching for further clues. Finding none, Benjen sighed and turned. "I'll let you rest. If you have need of me, you know where to find me." Once Benjen left, Ned sagged in his chair. The conversation had been mercifully brief, but it underscored how precariously he balanced on this blade's edge of secrecy. There would be no simple way to keep the truth forever from Benjen, nor from Caitlin should she arrive. And how would he explain the presence of 2 Targaryen wards? He closed his eyes, pressing his thumb and forefinger to the bridge of his nose. Every path seemed fraught with risk. For now, he could do little but maintain the pretense that Robert remained king in King's Landing, that Ned's reasons for leaving early were personal and no cause for alarm. Yet the day must come when letters arrived from the south. The new powers might demand Ned's presence, or at least an accounting of what transpired. If men discovered Robert's body, they would surmise an assassin lurked in the city. Tywin Lannister might waste no time in insinuating who that assassin might have been, or in sniffing out Targaryen survivors. Eventually, Ned realized he could not simply idle here waiting for doom. If he wished to protect Daenerys and Viserys, he needed to consider sending them away. But that too meant smuggling them out of the north, risking discovery on the roads or at sea. Worse, if they reached the free cities unguarded, what fate would they face there? Many would love to control the last Targaryens for their own political aims. And if any spy master realized Ned Stark was behind their survival, the repercussions would be dire. His thoughts turned in circles until he felt the edges of a headache creeping in. With a sigh, he rose from his chair and decided to check on the children once more. Moving quietly through the dark corridors, he found the door locked from within as instructed. He gave a gentle knock and announced himself. After a moment, the latch lifted and Daenerys let him in. Viserys was asleep again, apparently in a deeper slumber now that the tonic had taken hold. Daenerys perched on the edge of the bed, her chin propped on her knees. The single candle had guttered low, shadows flickering across the bare walls. She looked up, blinking. "Is it day or night?" she whispered as though she had lost all sense of time. "Night," Ned replied softly. "How fares your brother?" "He's breathing more steadily." "He's calmer." She hesitated. "Did you want him awakened?" "No, let him rest." Ned glanced around the small room, wincing inwardly at the cramped space. He hated that these children were confined so. "I only wanted to be sure you both were all right." Daenerys managed a small nod of gratitude. In the silence, Ned noticed how tense her shoulders were, how her posture hinted at fear. She was trying to be strong, but he could see the fragility beneath that facade. A girl who had lost her parents, her home, her entire legacy in a wave of violence. "You don't need to stay awake all night," he said gently. "Try to sleep as well. In the morning, I'll see about bringing you something less plain than these clothes, maybe a book to read. And if Viserys feels better, I'll ask Maester Luwin to bring more nourishing meals." Her lips parted as if to speak, but she only nodded once more, casting a fond glance at Viserys' sleeping form. Ned wondered if the boy had any real memory of King's Landing in peacetime, or if all he would ever recall were the horrors of its final days. Ned had heard the city's bells ring in surrender while the sack proceeded, and the smell of smoke still lingered in his memory. Viserys would have no illusions about war's cruelty, and that might shape him in ways Ned couldn't fully anticipate. At length, Ned offered Daenerys a faint smile. "Good night, then," he said, stepping back to the door. "Know that you're safe within these walls, as best I can manage." She whispered, "Thank you, my lord. I won't forget it." He let himself out, hearing the soft scrape of the bar as she locked it behind him. In the corridor, he stood a moment, pressing his palms against the cool stone. Then he made his way back to his solar, exhaustion bearing down more heavily with every step. He passed a window slit and glimpsed the quiet courtyard, the silhouettes of guards patrolling the walls. In the crisp northern night, everything seemed deceptively peaceful. The next morning dawned cold and gray, as though the sun could not quite pierce the low-hanging clouds. Ned rose early and spent the first part of his day addressing routine matters. A distant holdfast had sent word of a poor harvest, and local disputes required Winterfell's arbitration. These mundane tasks felt oddly comforting, a reminder of simpler duties. He conferred with a few stewards and gave instructions on supply distribution. If he hoped to keep the Targaryens hidden, maintaining a semblance of normalcy was essential. Before midday, he visited the children's room again. This time, Daenerys unlocked the door promptly. Viserys was awake, looking pale but less pained. He gave Ned a guarded stare. Daenerys stood beside him, and Ned could see she tried to tidy the small space, folding blankets neatly and stacking plates in a corner. "How are you feeling?" Ned asked the boy. Viserys shrugged. "Better," he said in a small voice. I dreamed of Mother. I dreamed of the big throne in the Red Keep, too." Ned's chest tightened. The Iron Throne, the seat Robert had claimed, which Ned had effectively vacated by his own hand. "Dreams can be unsettling," he said gently, choosing not to dwell on that topic. "I've asked Maester Luwin to bring you something more to eat. A warm meal might help you both regain your strength." Daenerys nodded, smoothing her plain linen dress. A far cry from the finery she might have worn as a princess of House Targaryen. Yet she seemed to accept this new reality with more grace than Ned would have expected from a royal child. "Thank you, my lord," she said quietly. "I have Viserys said something about a boat about going back across the sea. Is that possible?" Ned paused, studying her face. So the boy was already thinking of fleeing Westeros. Perhaps he remembered that their ancestors had once come from the Valyrian freehold across the narrow sea. Or maybe he simply feared what would happen if they stayed. "It's something we may consider," Ned allowed, not wishing to give false promises. "But traveling that far is dangerous, especially now. We must be patient." Viserys' face scrunched with frustration, but he remained silent. Daenerys lowered her gaze, uncertain. Ned reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know it's difficult," he said, "but trust me a while longer." She nodded, blinking back what might have been tears. If she cried, she did so in private. Ned could see she fought to maintain a calm front for her younger brother's sake. He admired that resilience, though he wished it were never forced upon her in the first place. When Maester Luwin arrived with a small cart bearing hot porridge, boiled eggs, and mulled cider, Ned helped him serve the children. Viserys, still subdued, managed to eat half his portion, while Daenerys took small bites, as though mindful of rationing the meal. Ned insisted they take what they needed. This was not the war-torn city anymore, where they had to fear each day's scraps. Still, the scars of that flight would not fade easily. Luwin cleared his throat. "My lord, might I speak with you outside?" He inclined his head toward the corridor. Ned excused himself, stepping outside with Luwin while the children remained inside to finish their meal. Once the door was shut, the maester said in low tones, "A raven arrived this morning from the Eyrie. Jon Arryn summons you." Ned's heart gave a painful thud. Jon Arryn was a second father to both him and Robert in their youth. Would the message speak of Robert's death or ask for news about the war's aftermath? What does it say? He asked. Luwin unfolded a small parchment from his sleeve. He congratulates you, in effect, on the rebellion's success. He writes that King Robert, Luwin paused uneasily, intends to secure the realm, quell the last Targaryen loyalists, and bring peace to Westeros. He urges you to come south to serve as a counselor in the new court. He says the king has not been seen in the capital for some days, but that lords are arriving to swear fealty and your presence is sorely needed. Ned felt a cold sweat on his back. So they had not or could not confirm Robert's death. Perhaps his body had been hidden or there was so much chaos that rumors abounded without proof. The idea that there was confusion over the king's whereabouts was both a boon and a curse. If they discovered the truth, suspicion might land on Ned. But as it was, Lord Arryn and others might be desperately seeking the king who had vanished. He exhaled. So Jon believes Robert is alive but missing. He's calling me to help find him or to keep the peace. I can't answer that summons. Not with the truth as it is. Luwin shifted uncomfortably. We could send a raven with some pretense that you were ill or that Winterfell is in need of your attention. But how long can we maintain such excuses, my lord? Ned shook his head, heart pounding. Not forever. But I need more time. If I ride south, I'll face questions I can't answer, and if they suspect me, the children will be in grave danger. Let's pen a reply stating that Winterfell has pressing issues following the war and that I must delay my departure. We'll promise to come when matters here are settled. The maester frowned but nodded. It may buy you some time. However, Jon Arryn knows you, my lord. He may suspect something is amiss if you refuse him entirely. Ned rubbed his brow. Aye, he may, but I don't see another way. We must hope the realm's confusion persists, that no one can piece together what truly happened to Robert. With that decided, Luwin bowed and returned to the maester's tower to draft a careful reply. Ned lingered by the door to the Targaryen children's room, wrestling with the guilt of lying to Jon Arryn, a man he loved like a father. But there was no choice. If Ned told the truth, the entire realm would come crashing down upon him and the children he had vowed to protect. He slipped back inside the chamber. Viserys had finished his porridge and looked marginally better. Daenerys was clearing away the empty bowl. At Ned's entrance, she set the bowl aside and studied him with quiet anxiety. Is something wrong? She asked, her voice tremulous. Ned tried to summon a reassuring tone. Just news from the south. Nothing you need fear at the moment. Viserys' eyes flicked to Ned's with a spark of something, curiosity or perhaps anger. They want to kill us still, don't they? If they find us? Ned swallowed. Some might, yes. But I won't let that happen. Viserys grimaced and looked away, his small fists curling around the blanket. Daenerys was watching Ned carefully, as if trying to gauge whether his assurances meant anything in a world that had shown her only betrayal. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. You're safe here, he repeated. I'll do everything in my power to keep it so. She nodded, though a hint of sorrow clouded her violet eyes. For a moment, Ned felt the keen weight of responsibility for this girl, this princess who, in another life, might have ruled with grace or been married off to form powerful alliances. Now she was a fugitive hidden behind locked doors in the seat of House Stark. If discovered, she could be the cause of fresh war. Yet in that small hand under his, he felt a flicker of trust. He steeled himself. I need to attend my duties. Rest, the both of you. Luwin will bring you more supplies later. And you can knock on the walls if you have a true emergency. There's a servants' corridor behind these rooms, so someone might hear. Just be careful. They thanked him in low voices and Ned departed. As he walked away, a creeping sense of dread seeped through him like winter chill. Every day that passed, he would juggle more lies, more uncertainty. The secret grew heavier and the realm would not remain in the dark forever. He forced himself to maintain a semblance of daily routine. He saw to the harvest reports, listened to minor disputes from local folk, greeted a few northern bannermen who arrived to pay respects. But always, in the back of his mind, he worried. Benjen's watchful eye rarely wandered far. Maester Luwin kept receiving ravens bearing news of the rebellion's aftermath. Rumors were circulating that Robert Baratheon had vanished, that Stannis was returning to Storm's End to secure it, that Renly had retreated to the Reach for reasons unknown. Tywin Lannister, some said, was furious at the lack of clarity from King's Landing. The city itself, according to one raven, was in a state of uneasy calm, with Lord Arryn and the newly arrived Prince Oberyn Martell both trying to ascertain the truth about the Targaryen heirs. Some insisted all Targaryens were dead, others whispered that a pair of them had escaped. Chaos reigned in place of certainty. Late one afternoon, after nearly a fortnight of this tense routine, Ned was summoned urgently to the courtyard. There, he found a group of riders bearing the sigil of House Tully, an emissary from Riverrun. His heart thumped as he approached. One of the men dismounted, bowing stiffly. "My Lord Stark," the rider said, "I bring greetings from Lord Hoster Tully and from your betrothed, Lady Caitlin. We were dispatched to learn whether you intended to proceed to Riverrun to complete the wedding arrangements." Lord Tully grows anxious as months have passed since the war's end. Ned kept his composure, though inside he felt a rising swirl of conflicting responsibilities. "Thank you for the message. I do plan to travel to Riverrun soon. It's been a difficult transition, returning to the north after so long away." He spoke carefully, aware that others in the courtyard might overhear. "How is Lady Caitlin?" "She is well, my lord, but concerned by your absence. She expected you to arrive or at least send word. Lord Tully begs you to come before the turning of the season that the marriage may proceed in a timely fashion." Ned nodded, lips pressed thin. He could hardly imagine leaving Winterfell now with Daenerys and Viserys secreted away. But he could not ignore his betrothal obligations, not if he wished to avoid insult or worse, suspicion. "Tell Lord Tully that I am grateful for his patience. I will come as soon as I am able. In the meantime, please take rest and refresh yourselves here at Winterfell." The riders bowed, and Ned instructed a steward to tend to their horses and arrange for comfortable lodgings. He watched them walk away, unsettled. If he traveled to Riverrun even for a short while, who would guard the secret of the Targaryen children? Could he trust Luwin alone to manage it? And what if something happened in the meantime, some rumor or slip that revealed their presence? That evening, he sought out Maester Luwin once more in his tower. He found him in a circle of candlelight, studying a large map of the Seven Kingdoms. At Ned's appearance, he set aside the quill and bowed his head. "My lord." Ned wasted no time. "Riverrun demands my presence, but I cannot leave Winterfell with the children hidden here. Not without establishing a secure plan." Luwin folded his hands. "You speak truly. The longer you remain absent from Riverrun, the more you risk straining relations with House Tully. Yet if you depart, who watches over Daenerys and Viserys? If they are discovered in your absence, scandal and worse could erupt." Ned paced, boots echoing on the stone floor. "They can't stay locked in that room indefinitely. The staff will grow suspicious. The children themselves will be stifled. I've considered perhaps disguising them as common orphans, letting them mingle in Winterfell under false names. But the risk is still great. Their Valyrian features someone might guess." Luwin nodded. "We could cut the boys' hair and the girls as well. Dye might help, though that is less reliable. If they adopt new names, pretend to be children of some lesser retainer, it might work for a time, so long as they keep their histories secret." Ned drummed his fingers on the table. "And if I do that and then ride to Riverrun, they'd be under your eye and Benjen's. But I'd have to trust no one else would piece together the truth. The realm is not so large, and rumors travel. It may still be safer than leaving them locked away," Luwin offered gently. "People notice locked doors." Weariness tugged at Ned's soul. "I'll speak with them, see how they feel about adopting false names. Let's gather the necessary items, scissors, perhaps some dye. I hate to strip them of their heritage, but if it keeps them alive." A knock came at the tower door. Both men tensed until they heard Benjen's familiar voice. Luwin admitted him, and Ned met his brother's searching gaze. Benjen's face held a seriousness that made Ned's stomach twist. "I've come from the ramparts," he said. "We've had more ravens from the Arryn and from King's Landing itself." Ned's pulse raced. "What do they say?" Benjen handed over a sealed parchment. "This one arrived from Lord Arryn's maester. He begs you to come south. Word spreads that Robert is missing, vanished, and the realm is uneasy. Some suspect Targaryen loyalists killed him. Others say he might be wounded or in hiding. There's talk that Stannis is preparing to claim the throne if Robert does not reappear soon." Ned clenched his jaw. "Then Robert's disappearance is no secret now. The realm truly is in disarray." Benjen nodded, his eyes flicking to Luwin and back to Ned. "There's more, though no one can confirm it. Rumors that Targaryen children may have escaped the sack of King's Landing. The same children rumored to be dead. Some say they might be across the narrow sea, others that they're in Dorne, or even hidden in the Crownlands. 1,000 stories, likely nonsense, but the realm is abuzz. The Lannisters want them found, dead or alive." Ned exchanged a tight, meaningful glance with Luwin. How swiftly the rumor mill churned. He forced himself to adopt a neutral expression. "It's no wonder the new lords are anxious. Targaryen heirs would threaten the Baratheon claim." Benjen inclined his head. "Just so. Jon Arryn begs you to come help quell the unrest, to serve as hand of the king in Robert's place, or to help uncover the truth of his disappearance. He believes your presence could restore calm. A bitter pang struck Ned's chest. Jon Arryn had always relied on his sense of honor, on his loyalty. Now Ned could offer neither truth nor straightforward help. I cannot go, he murmured. Not yet. Benjen frowned. Will you at least explain why? I have obligations here, Ned said quietly, his gaze flicking to Luwin. Give me time, Ben. Soon I'll decide my course. His brother's frustration was evident, but Benjen pressed no further. After a moment, he left, looking troubled. Luwin let out a breath, turning back to Ned. The realm calls, my lord. But you remain bound by your secret. Ned slumped into a chair. And that secret grows more perilous every day. I'll do as we discussed, disguise the children. Let them move about Winterfell unnoticed as far as is possible. Then, perhaps, I can ride south long enough to appease House Tully without betraying what we've done. They set the plan in motion. That very evening, under cover of darkness, Ned and Maester Luwin gathered the materials, plain garments in muted northern browns and grays, shears to trim their hair, and a mixture of dark dye derived from walnut husks and other herbs. Ned carried these items to the children's room, where Daenerys greeted him with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. He explained what they intended to do, speaking gently. We can't keep you hidden here forever. If I'm to leave Winterfell, I must ensure you can blend in without being recognized as Targaryens. This is the only way. Viserys, sitting on the bed, scowled. Our hair is part of our blood. Why must we hide like rats? Ned felt a pang of sympathy and tried to keep his tone kind. Because the realm wants you dead, lad. If you stand out, you're in danger. Let us do this to keep you safe. Viserys' mouth twisted, but he said nothing more. Daenerys lowered her eyes, touching her silver gold locks. You'll cut it, she asked softly. I, Ned said, placing a hand on her shoulder. And then we'll dye it brown. People will think you're just another northern girl. I'm sorry, truly, but it's necessary. Tears glistened in her eyes for a moment, but she blinked them away. I understand, she whispered. She turned to Viserys. It's the only way. He huffed in resignation. Fine, he mumbled. Maester Luwin stepped forward with a bowl of warm water, cloths, and the dye mixture. Gently, he guided Daenerys to sit on a stool. Ned braced himself. Somehow, the small, mundane act felt crushing, as though stripping away the last fragments of their identity. He lifted the shears, the metal glinting in the candlelight, and carefully began to snip away Daenerys' silken hair. Each lock drifted to the floor, pale as moonlight. She did not move or speak, though Ned saw her fingers clench around the edge of the stool until her knuckles were white. He tried to be quick but thorough. Once her hair was cut short, just above the shoulders, Luwin took the dye and massaged it into the strands. The smell of walnut and pungent herbs filled the room. Daenerys closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, leaving faint trails on her skin. She made no sound. When at last Luwin rinsed the dye from her hair with a clean cloth, the transformation was startling. Instead of shimmering silver gold, her hair was now a warm, light brown that made her violet eyes stand out even more. She looked younger, more vulnerable. She reached up tentatively, touched the shortened locks, and let out a tiny, shaky sigh. Ned's voice caught in his throat. You're very brave, he said quietly. I promise you this is not forever. She nodded, swallowing back emotion. Then she rose, stepping aside so Viserys could take her place. The boy glared at the shears as though they might bite him, but he allowed Ned to trim his hair as well. For Viserys, Ned went even shorter, leaving little more than a boyish mop. Once dyed, it took on a darker hue than Daenerys's, an almost chestnut shade. The boy kept his eyes fixed on the far wall, jaw tight. When the task was done, Luwin laid out the plain wool clothing, simple tunics, breeches for Viserys, a modest dress for Daenerys. They were instructed to change and then meet Ned in the corridor so no one would see two Targaryens emerging. Ned left them for a few moments to dress, waiting with Luwin outside. The maester held the old silver hair in a cloth as though it were some precious relic about to be discarded. Should we burn it? Luwin asked softly. Ned nodded grimly. Yes. Burn it all. We can't risk anyone seeing that hair. Luwin departed to do just that. Moments later, the door opened and the children emerged. Ned's heart twisted at the sight of them wearing the drab northern garb, hair trimmed and dyed. They looked like small folk from any village in the north, save for the slight difference of their pale skin and those remarkable eyes. Viserys fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable, while Daenerys stepped forward with an odd poise as if trying to square her shoulders against the weight of this disguise. Ned forced a reassuring smile. You look like northerners now. For your names, Daenerys, we'll call you Danya. Viserys, perhaps Vicon. They're not uncommon names in these parts. You must remember to answer to them if anyone asks." They nodded in unison, solemn. Ned continued, "You'll stay in a different chamber now, nearer the servants. We'll say you're wards of a minor retainer who died in the war. You've no living kin, so you've come under House Stark's protection. That should satisfy casual questions." Daenerys, Danya glanced at Viserys, Vicon, and then back at Ned. "And if someone asks where we're from? You might say a small holdfast in the White Knife region or from a place near the Rills. No one will press you too hard if you seem shy. Remember, speak as little as possible, especially about your past." Viserys gave a stiff nod, lips thin. "We understand." Ned set a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder. "I know it's difficult, but we want you to have some freedom, walk the corridors, take meals in a quieter hall with other wards and fosterlings so you're not caged like birds in a locked room. Just keep your heads down, all right?" They murmured assent. Ned led them down a winding passage to a modest suite of rooms used in the past for lesser guests or the children of bannermen. Along the way, they passed a handful of servants and guards. None paid them more than a fleeting glance, just two unknown children trailing after Lord Stark, wearing plain clothes. Ned felt a pang of relief that their transformation was holding. Once inside the suite, Ned saw to it that the hearth was lit. The main sitting room was small and had two adjoining bedchambers. "You'll stay here," he said, gesturing to the space. "Maester Luwin and I will check on you. I'll have a servant named Marna bring you meals. She's loyal and doesn't pry." Daenerys surveyed the room, her new hair catching the firelight. She looked older and younger all at once, as though the strain of the past weeks had aged her soul, but the simplicity of her new garb made her seem scarcely more than a peasant girl. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Truly." Ned gave her a small nod. "If you're seen around the castle, just remember your new names. And keep your distance from me in public. Too much attention might raise questions." Viserys scowled but said nothing. Ned could sense the boy's resentment simmering under the surface. He tried to speak gently. "Vicon, if you need anything, you need only ask Maester Luwin. I'm sorry to ask you both to bear such burdens." Viserys' eyes glimmered with unshed tears, but he turned away, feigning interest in the small bedchamber. Daenerys offered Ned a faint, sad smile. "We'll be careful." Satisfied they understood, Ned departed, closing the door behind him with a heavy heart. This was no life for children forced to wear false identities in the home of the man who had ended their greatest protector. Yet it was better than certain death. Ned reminded himself of that truth with each step he took back toward his solar. The next days tested the fragile arrangement. Daenerys and Viserys, now Danya and Vicon, ventured out under the watchful eye of a trusted servant or Maester Luwin himself. They mingled cautiously with other fostered children of minor lords. Daenerys quickly learned to keep her gaze lowered, and when asked about her origins, she mumbled something about the White Knife, letting others assume the details. Viserys rarely spoke at all, still angry at his loss of station. But no one seemed suspicious. The staff accepted them as two orphans brought in by Lord Stark's compassion, a story not unheard of in the battered aftermath of the war. Ned, meanwhile, prepared to depart for Riverrun. With great reluctance, he penned a letter to Lord Tully and Caitlin stating his intention to arrive within a fortnight. He doubted he could be gone too long. But if he did not go, it might jeopardize the alliance that had been so crucial in the rebellion, an alliance he had once believed would help Robert ascend the throne and marry Caitlyn's sister, or see Ned himself wed to Caitlyn. All those plans were now overshadowed by the secret he harbored. A part of him dreaded the journey, knowing he would have to face not only the Tullus but also the swirling rumors of Robert's disappearance. He prayed no raven-bearing accusations against him would arrive in Riverrun. He would keep to his story. Robert remained king, absent from King's Landing but surely to return. Benjen noticed the preparations with a furrowed brow. He questioned Ned on the reason for the sudden trip, and Ned merely spoke of wedding obligations. Benjen seemed unconvinced but did not press too hard. On the day before Ned was to depart, he gathered Daenerys and Viserys in their new quarters. They stood in front of him, hair still dark from the dye, looking like any northern children. Yet Ned could see the remnants of their old selves in their eyes, a flicker of pride or the longing for lost traditions. He knelt to be at their eye level. "I'll be gone for a few weeks at most. Maester Luwin will watch over you. If there's any danger, any sign of suspicion, you must stay hidden in your room and wait for him." Daenerys nodded gravely. Viserys spoke in a small, sullen voice. "You're leaving us?" "I must. I have family obligations. But I'll return, and if all goes well, we'll find a more permanent solution for you both." He felt a pang of guilt at how uncertain that solution sounded. Did it mean smuggling them to Essos or keeping them here for years under false names? He couldn't yet say. Viserys swallowed, some of his bravado deflating. What if the men who want us dead come here? Ned touched the boy's shoulder. They won't harm you so long as you remain hidden. Winterfell is vast and its people loyal to me. Trust in that. Daenerys blinked, tears threatening again, though she fought them down. Will you be careful, my lord? He managed a soft smile. I will. And you must be as well. He hesitated, then added, remember, if any letters come about Robert Baratheon, keep your silence. No one outside this castle must learn who you truly are. They both nodded. Daenerys whispered, thank you again, and Ned felt the tightness in his throat return. He wondered how many times she had thanked him for saving her life while he carried the guilt of killing the friend who would have ended it. He stood, forcing himself to keep his composure. Early the next morning, Ned departed Winterfell with a small retinue. As the gates opened to the cold northern road, he glanced back at the gray walls. In those walls were 2 children who might change the fate of the realm if discovered. He prayed they would remain undiscovered. Then he turned his horse southward, leading his men along the Kingsroad, ironically named for a king who no longer lived. The journey south was quieter than his trek north had been, but his mind was no less burdened. He traveled swiftly, not wishing to linger at any holdfast. At night, in the small inns or campfires by the roadside, he lay awake imagining every possible crisis that might befall Winterfell in his absence. What if a curious guard recognized Daenerys's face, remembering rumors of Targaryen eyes? What if Viserys let his resentment slip, uttering the word dragon at the wrong moment? Or if the Lannisters or Baratheon loyalists arrived without warning? The thoughts tortured him. He was nearing the neck when he encountered a band of travelers on the road, men bearing the sigil of House Baratheon. Ned's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his face impassive. They were led by a grizzled knight who regarded Ned with cautious respect. Lord Stark, the man greeted, offering a slight bow. We ride from the south. Storm's End is in disarray. Stannis Baratheon calls men to bolster its garrison. He's concerned about rumored plots. Ned forced a calm expression. I have not heard details. Do you know anything of King Robert's whereabouts? The knight pursed his lips. None do, it seems. Some fear he's dead, but none can prove it. Stannis fears that if Robert does not return, others might lay claim to the throne. My men and I travel to secure alliances in the Riverlands. See who might stand with House Baratheon. Ned nodded gravely. I wish you luck. I am bound for Riverrun to see Lord Tully. He said nothing more about the war or the Targaryen rumors, offering a neutral farewell and continuing on. After the men parted ways, Ned allowed himself to exhale slowly. Each encounter confirmed the realm was in turmoil, uncertain who truly ruled. Ironically, that uncertainty shielded Ned's crime, for no one seemed sure how Robert had vanished. But how long could that last? Eventually, he and his guard pressed through the neck, the boggy landscape giving way to the more fertile fields of the Riverlands. The banners of House Tully became more frequent, and the roads busier with merchants, knights, and peasants rebuilding after the war's destruction. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions at the prospect of seeing Catelyn again. She was his betrothed, a kind and noble woman he respected, perhaps loved, though their bond had been mostly arranged. How would she react if she ever learned the truth? Could Ned condemn her to share in that guilt? He vowed to keep it secret. At last, the towers of Riverrun appeared, framed by the red fork of the trident. Ned's party was admitted through the gates, and soon he stood before Lord Hoster Tully, a broad-shouldered man whose hair had grayed considerably. At his side stood Catelyn Tully, her auburn hair bright in the sunlight, her eyes filled with guarded warmth. She curtsied. My Lord Stark, Weavy. You waited long for your arrival. Ned bowed, swallowing the knot in his throat. My lady, he murmured. Forgive the delay. Much has weighed on me since the war's end. She looked at him searchingly, and he wondered if she could see the shadows behind his eyes. But her father cleared his throat, commanding attention. Lord Stark, Hoster said, we are eager to formalize this alliance. The wedding must not be delayed further. Will you agree to a date within a fortnight? Ned forced a tight smile. I shall, my lord, if it pleases you. He glimpsed Catelyn, trying to read her response. Her cheeks flushed slightly. She nodded, though with an undercurrent of concern in her gaze. He would remain at Riverrun for the wedding, then. Even if it took weeks or longer, he had little choice. The war had been won, so the realm believed, and now these marriages were supposed to cement the unity of the great houses. Ned's spirit felt leaden with the knowledge that the unity was already fraying. As the days passed in Riverrun, feasting and preparations for the wedding were set in motion. Caitlin tried to engage Ned in conversation about the future, about building a life at Winterfell, raising children of their own. He did his best to respond with courtesy, offering small smiles and brief assurances, but his heart was elsewhere. At night, lying awake in the chamber assigned to him, he imagined Daenerys and Viserys creeping through the halls of Winterfell, speaking in hushed voices, guarded by Luwin's caution. He feared some slip or accident. He feared discovering, upon his return, that everything he'd tried to protect was lost. Lord Hoster noticed Ned's distraction. During one midday meal, he asked directly, "Is something troubling you, my lord? You seem haunted." Ned hesitated, then replied, "I am still weighed by losses from the war. My father, my brother, it is difficult to rejoice while we mourn." Hoster nodded sympathetically. "We have all lost much. But the wedding will help bring renewed hope, no? We must look to the future." Ned forced a faint smile, aware that he was burying the greatest loss of all, Robert. If the father of his future bride knew how that loss had come about, Ned would surely be cast out as a villain. So he offered only the mask of polite grief. One night, as the wedding day drew near, Ned walked the battlements of Riverrun beneath a moonlit sky. The waters of the Red Fork glimmered below. He found Caitlin there, draped in a cloak against the chill. She turned at his approach, softening in expression. "My lord," she greeted quietly. "I couldn't sleep." "Nor I," Ned admitted. He joined her, resting his hands on the stone parapet. After a moment of companionable silence, she spoke again. "Do you truly wish this marriage?" Her voice was gentle but probing. "I know our houses arranged it, but I want to know your heart." Ned stared at the moonlit water. He recalled all the reasons they were meant to wed. Alliance, duty, the forging of new bonds after the rebellion. He did not dislike her. In fact, he admired her composure and intelligence. But he felt a wall of secrets between them, secrets that would never allow complete honesty. Yet he could see the sincerity in her eyes, and he found himself wanting to offer some measure of comfort. "I do," he said, voice low. "You are an honorable woman, and this union, it is what my father wanted. I only wish he were here to see it. Everything has changed so quickly." She placed a hand over his, and the warmth of her touch startled him. "We have both lost family to this war. Perhaps we can find solace in each other. Build something lasting at Winterfell." He nodded, though the thought of returning to Winterfell with a new wife and continuing the charade around two hidden Targaryens made his stomach twist. Still, he covered her hand with his, forcing a small smile. "Thank you." They stood there a while, the hush of the night wrapping around them. In the distance, a night bird called. Ned wondered if somewhere else in the realm, Jon Arryn was still searching for Robert, or if Stannis had raised his banners, or if Tywin Lannister had begun to suspect the truth. He felt the sword of Damocles swinging overhead. Days later, the wedding took place in Riverrun's September. It was a smaller ceremony than originally envisioned, given the unsettled state of the realm. Yet it still carried the proper pageantry. Ned wore solemn gray attire, Caitlin a flowing blue and silver gown. Lord Hoster gave her away, while the small gathering of Tully bannermen and a handful of northern representatives observed. The vows were spoken under the 7 aspects of the faith of the 7, though Ned would have preferred the old gods. But tradition here in the Riverlands demanded otherwise. When the final words were said, and he kissed Caitlin's cheek, the hall echoed with polite applause. The newly married couple then sat for a modest feast. Ned maintained the outward courtesy of a groom, accepting toasts, speaking politely to guests, but he could not quell the roiling tension in his gut. The entire time, he yearned to return north and ensure Daenerys and Viserys were still safe. Eventually, the wedding celebrations wound down. Lord Hoster insisted they remain for a few more days, as was custom, but Ned pressed to leave soon after. He invoked pressing duties at Winterfell as an excuse. By the end of the week, he and his new wife departed Riverrun with a small escort, heading north again. Caitlin traveled in a covered carriage for part of the journey, an arrangement for comfort rather than necessity. Ned rode alongside, brooding in silence, while she occasionally parted the curtains to speak with him. She was a perceptive woman, and despite her best attempts to draw him into conversation about the future, Ned's guarded responses made her frown. Yet she did not push him in front of the retainers. He felt gratitude that she was at least discreet. As they neared the twins, they found Walder Frey's men exacting tolls for passage, but Ned was expected and they crossed without delay. Lord Frey himself did not appear to greet them, sending a son or grandson in his stead. Ned had little inclination to linger in that place, knowing House Frey's reputation for opportunism. Once past the twins, they rode for days through the northern riverlands and into the bogs of the Neck. Each day seemed to drag on, cold rains slowing their progress. At night, Ned found it difficult to sleep in the same tent as his new wife, though he tried to be courteous. There was an awkwardness in their new union, as though both recognized they were strangers forging an alliance. In time, he thought they might grow to know each other's hearts. But the secret he carried was a chasm between them. Finally, they passed Moat Cailin and entered the north proper. The air grew chillier, and Caitlin often wrapped herself in furs. Ned guided the party along the causeway, now more comfortable with this terrain. He felt a rush of conflicting emotions as Winterfell's walls finally came into view. This was home, but the web of secrecy waiting inside could unravel in an instant. They rode through the gates at midday under a gray sky. The courtyard bustled with the usual activity: stable hands, guards, servants carrying supplies. At the sight of Ned's return, a stable boy rushed forward, and stewards hurried to help Lady Caitlin dismount. Benjen appeared, striding across the yard with a faint smile for Ned and a respectful bow to Caitlin. "Welcome to Winterfell, my lady," Benjen said politely. "I trust the journey was not too arduous." She smiled graciously. "Your roads are long, but I'm pleased to be here at last. My lord husband speaks often of his home." Ned felt a pang, knowing how little he'd actually said about Winterfell beyond surface details. But before he could respond, Benjen leaned in and murmured, "We must talk, Ned." Urgently. Ned's gut tightened. He turned to his wife. "Cat, go inside with the steward. He'll show you to your rooms. I'll join you shortly." She lifted her brows, perhaps taken aback at the abruptness, but she nodded, giving him a curious glance before following the steward indoors. Once she was out of earshot, Ned looked to Benjen. "What's happened?" Benjen drew him aside, lowering his voice. "We've had visitors from the south. Men claiming to be investigating the king's disappearance. They call themselves the Crown's investigators, with a writ from Lord Arryn. They asked questions about Robert, Targaryens, everything. We also received more ravens. Some said that Targaryen loyalists might be hiding in the north. People whisper that you knew more than you let on." A chill settled in Ned's bones. "When did they arrive?" "Just 2 days ago. Maester Luwin and I kept them at bay, insisted you were away but would return soon. They want to speak with you directly. They seem convinced the Targaryens might be in Dorne, but they're not ruling out other regions." Ned's jaw clenched. "And the children? Are they safe?" "They remain disguised, living quietly among the staff as your wards, as planned. So far, these investigators haven't noticed them or asked after them by name. But we can't be sure how long that will last." Ned exhaled slowly. "Thank the gods. I need to see them." Benjen nodded. "The investigators are lodged in the guest quarters, waiting for your return. They'll likely seek an audience with you soon. Luwin told them you might not arrive for another few days, so you have some time to plan your words." "Good." Ned felt his heart pounding. "Thank you, Ben." Benjen's eyes flickered with the frustration that had been building. "Will you tell me what truly happened, Ned? I feel as if we're dancing in the dark. These men come looking for Robert and Targaryens while you've been away. What are we hiding?" Ned stilled, searching his brother's gaze. He could see the loyalty there, but also the hurt. He owed Benjen so much. Yet he dared not speak the truth. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Trust me a while longer." Benjen's face tightened in anger. For a moment, Ned thought he might demand answers. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're my brother. I'll trust you. But I don't like the shadows creeping around us." Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. "Nor do I. But it can't be helped." Benjen's eyes reflected worry. "Hurry then. Speak to Maester Luwin about these visitors and see your wards. I'll keep Lady Caitlin occupied, show her around the castle." Ned nodded gratefully, though guilt gnawed at him. He thrust Benjen into this web of half-lies and secrets. "I'll do so." They parted, and Ned headed directly for the suite where Daenerys and Viserys were supposedly living. He climbed the narrow steps to the modest tower room and knocked softly. Maester Luwin answered, relief flooding his features. "My lord, you've returned at last." Ned stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "How are they?" Daenerys and Viserys stood at the far end of the room, wearing their drab northern garb, their hair still dyed. They looked older somehow, or more accustomed to this life of subterfuge. At Ned's arrival, Daenerys' face brightened with a flicker of relief. Viserys lingered behind her, arms crossed. "We're well," Daenerys said softly, her eyes searching Ned's face. Are we still safe?" He nodded, though anxiety churned in his gut. "Yes, for now. But there are men from the crown here asking questions about Robert and Targaryens. They haven't singled you out, but we must be extra cautious." Viserys frowned, stepping forward. "We heard rumors that men from the south had arrived. We thought they might come for us." Ned's gaze swept over both children, noting that Viserys no longer looked quite so frail. Living in Winterfell with regular meals and a roof overhead had given him a measure of health. But his eyes still held that wounded anger. Daenerys, meanwhile, seemed calmer, her posture more poised. They had grown in ways Ned had never expected to see. "No harm will befall you while I live," Ned said, voice firm. "Just continue your disguise. If these men see you, they'll think you're common wards. We must give them no reason to suspect otherwise." Maester Luwin cleared his throat. "The investigators likely plan to depart within a few days unless they find cause to linger. Their questions have been general, but they'll want to speak with you, my lord." Ned exhaled. "Then I'll give them the same general answers. That Robert left King's Landing on business unknown to me, that I've seen no sign of Targaryens. I only pray they accept it and move on." He looked at Daenerys and Viserys, lowering his voice. "Stay in your routine. Don't hide away in your chambers all day, or that might appear suspicious. But avoid the investigators if you can. If one of them tries to speak to you, keep silent or pretend ignorance. Maester Luwin will handle it." They nodded in unison. Daenerys hesitated, then asked, "And the war, is it truly over?" Ned paused, thinking of the realm's chaos. The open battles ended, but the realm is unsettled. Until a new king is firmly established, everyone is on edge. Her gaze flicked downward. She fiddled with the hem of her sleeve, perhaps remembering how her family had once reigned unquestioned. Viserys, on the other hand, clenched his jaw, bitterness flickering in his eyes. "A new king without dragons," he muttered. "Just swords and false claims." Ned winced inwardly. He could not fault the boy's anger, he had lost everything. But he had no comfort to offer. He simply said, "Be patient. We'll talk more once these men leave." He left them to settle, turning to Maester Luwin as they moved to an adjoining side chamber. Speaking in hushed tones, Ned asked, "Has my new wife, Lady Caitlin, encountered them? Or these children?" Luwin shook his head. "I kept them separate, and I ensured the investigators never glimpsed the children. As for Lady Caitlin, she's only just arrived, so there's been no chance for her to suspect anything. But she'll learn of these wards eventually. How shall we explain them to her?" Ned thought of Caitlin's curious eyes. "We'll say they're orphans of the war, placed under my guardianship. She has a kind heart, she won't question me too harshly if I claim it was an act of mercy. But I'd rather keep her from the full truth for her own sake." Luwin inclined his head, though concern pinched his features. "Very well, my lord. I only hope the subterfuge does not strain your marriage." Ned gave a tired shrug. "It may, but I'll do what I must." Then he clasped Luwin's arm. "Thank you for holding everything together in my absence." The maester offered a solemn nod, and Ned departed, heading to find Caitlin. He braced himself for the questions that would inevitably arise. But for now, the paramount danger was the investigators from the crown. He resolved to deal with them swiftly, feeding them half-truths that cast no suspicion on Winterfell. He located Caitlin in the Great Hall, conversing with Benjen and a steward about the layout of the castle. She brightened somewhat at Ned's arrival, though he could sense her caution. Perhaps she recognized a tension in the air or in his demeanor. He took her aside, speaking in a low voice. "Forgive me for leaving you so soon after our arrival. Duty's called." She lifted her chin, measured. "I understand. But tell me, who are these men I've heard mentioned, those from the crown?" Ned exhaled. "Investigators searching for news of Robert. They claim he vanished, and they suspect Targaryen loyalists. I'll speak with them soon. There's little to tell." Caitlin studied him. "You sound certain." He forced a small shrug. "I fought alongside Robert, but once the war was done, I left the south for Winterfell. He had his own affairs. I assume he'll turn up eventually." She nodded slowly, though her eyes flickered with curiosity. "Very well. If you require me at your side, I'll support you as your wife." He felt a stab of guilt, forcing a warm smile. "Thank you, Kat. For now, it's best I handle it alone. I don't want to entangle you in southern politics." She acquiesced, though a shadow of doubt lingered in her gaze. Ned placed a hand gently over hers, hoping to reassure her. In truth, he feared that if she stood beside him during the interrogation, he might slip or she might sense his lies. The fewer people who heard his carefully rehearsed answers, the better. That evening, the Crown's investigators formally requested an audience with Lord Stark. They were two men, Ser Harold, a stocky knight with lines of worry on his brow, and a gaunt man named Maester Tommen. In the privacy of Ned's solar, they exchanged courtesies before cutting to the chase. "My Lord Stark," Ser Harold said, "we come on behalf of Lord Arryn. King Robert was last seen in King's Landing. Some say he left voluntarily, others that he was attacked by Targaryen loyalists. Do you know anything of his disappearance?" Ned's heart thudded, but his outward expression remained calm. "No. When I left the city, Robert remained behind to secure his kingship. I expected we'd hear from him within weeks. I've had no word since, aside from the rumor he vanished." Maester Tommen eyed Ned closely. "Some claim Targaryen children escaped, that they might have conspired against the king." Ned's lips pressed thin in a show of distaste. "I know nothing of that. The Targaryens were all but wiped out. If some children escaped, they pose little threat. In any case, I have no knowledge of such matters. I returned home to attend to my own losses. My father and brother were murdered by Aerys Targaryen, as you well know." Ser Harold nodded, sympathy crossing his features. "We do know your losses were great, my lord. But Robert was your friend. Would you not have stayed to ensure his reign took hold? Why depart so soon?" Ned breathed evenly. "My friend's reign was secure. Tywin Lannister and others had already sworn fealty. I was weary of war and yearned for home. I had to prepare for my nuptials as well. The war cost me dearly. I needed no more of the South." Maester Tommen exchanged a glance with Harold. "Has there been any unusual activity in the north? Any sign that Targaryen loyalists might have fled here?" Ned gave a slow shake of his head. "I've seen no such signs. The north is vast, but it would be foolish for Targaryens to seek refuge here, given my own family's history. Would you not agree?" Harold grunted. "Aye, that's a fair point. Still, we must be thorough. You have many wards and fosterlings in this castle, do you not?" Ned's pulse jumped. "A few orphans of lesser lords who died in the war, yes. You're free to speak with them if you wish, though you'll find them nondescript." Maester Tommen peered at Ned. "It might be wise to meet them, yes? We prefer to leave no stone unturned." Ned tensed inside, but outwardly he forced a casual nod. "Of course. I'll arrange for you to see them tomorrow. You'll find they have little to say about Robert or any Targaryens." Ser Harold rose, smoothing his tabard. "We appreciate your cooperation, Lord Stark. We'll impose on your hospitality for a few more days if it's no trouble." Ned feigned a polite smile. "No trouble at all. If I can be of further assistance, you have only to ask." They departed, leaving Ned's nerves raw. Tomorrow they would meet the wards, including Daenerys and Viserys in their disguises. Could the children hold up under scrutiny? He prayed they would remember to keep silent and act the part. Their entire future hinged on that deception. He immediately sent for Maester Luwin and explained the